Kodiak. Kodiak. The morning of June 2nd, 2025, dawned grey and cold across Kodiak Island, Alaska, with low-hanging clouds that seemed to press down on the rugged landscape like a heavy blanket. The air carried the scent of salt spray from the Pacific and the rich, earthy smell of the dense alder thickets that covered much of the island's interior. For Daniel Michael Reeves, a 43-year-old petroleum engineer from Anchorage, this was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a father-son bonding trip to one of Alaska's most remote and spectacular wilderness areas. He had no way of knowing that within 12 hours he would be dead, his body mangled beyond recognition by one of the most powerful predators on Earth. Daniel had been planning this trip for over 2 years, ever since his divorce from Patricia had been finalized and he'd gained joint custody of their son, Ethan James Reeves. At 14, Ethan was at that difficult age where he seemed more interested in his PlayStation and TikTok than spending time with his father. The boy had grown sullen and withdrawn since the divorce, his grades slipping from A's to C's, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by teenage angst and resentment. Daniel hoped that a week of fishing, hiking, and camping in Alaska's wilderness might bridge the growing gap between them, might remind his son of the adventures they used to share when he was younger. The two had flown into Kodiak from Anchorage on Alaska Airlines Flight 66 at 3:47 p.m. on May 30th, their gear packed into oversized duffel bags and hard-shell cases. Daniel had spared no expense on equipment, top-of-the-line camping gear from REI, a Coleman 4-season tent rated for extreme weather, sleeping bags designed for sub-zero temperatures, a portable camp stove, water purification tablets, emergency beacons, and enough freeze-dried food for 10 days. He'd also brought his prized possession, a custom Winchester Model 70 rifle chambered in .0. 300 Winchester Magnum, along with federal premium ammunition loaded with 180-grain Barnes TSX bullets, rounds specifically designed for large, dangerous game. Ethan, tall for his age at 5'9", but still carrying the awkward proportions of adolescence, had been less than enthusiastic about the trip from the start. His dark hair hung over his eyes in the style that drove his father crazy, and he spent most of the flight with earbuds in, staring out the window at the endless expanse of wilderness below. When Daniel tried to point out geographical features or share his excitement about the upcoming adventure, Ethan would nod politely, but quickly return to his music or his phone. The silence between them felt heavier than the camping equipment they'd packed. Their base camp was established at Karluk Lake, approximately 47 miles southwest of Kodiak City, accessible only by float plane or an extremely challenging overland trek. The lake, nearly 15 miles long and known for its world-class salmon fishing, was surrounded by dense spruce and hemlock forests that gave way to vast meadows of fireweed and cowparsnip. The area was also known for something else. It supported one of the highest concentrations of brown bears in the world. Kodiak bears, a subspecies of brown bear found only on the Kodiak archipelago, are the largest bears in Alaska and among the largest land carnivores on Earth. Adult males commonly exceed 1,000 pounds, with some specimens reaching 1,500 pounds or more. Daniel was well aware of the risks. He'd taken a wilderness safety course specifically focused on bear encounters, had read extensively about bear behavior, and had equipped himself with bear spray, noisemakers, and his rifle. He'd also hired Marcus Thompson, a local guide with 23 years of experience in Kodiak's backcountry, to help them navigate the terrain and provide expertise about wildlife behavior. Marcus, a weathered man of 56 with graying hair and hands scarred from decades of handling fishing lines and camp equipment, had initially been reluctant to take on a client with a teenage son during the peak of bear season. "This isn't Yellowstone," Marcus had warned during their pre-trip briefing at his office in Kodiak City. "These bears are different. Bigger, more aggressive, and they're not used to seeing humans. A sow with cubs will charge first and ask questions later. A big boar looking for an easy meal won't hesitate to investigate your camp. You need to understand that out there, we're not at the top of the food chain. But Daniel had been persistent, offering to pay Marcus's premium rate and providing detailed documentation of his outdoor experience. He'd grown up hunting and fishing in Montana, had completed advanced wilderness first aid training, and had successfully navigated challenging terrain in Alaska's interior. Marcus finally agreed, though he insisted on strict protocols. All food would be stored in bear-proof containers at least 200 yards from their sleeping area. They would never travel without at least 2 forms of bear deterrent, and they would maintain constant situational awareness at all times. The first 2 days of the trip had gone better than expected. They'd established their camp on the south shore of Karluk Lake, in a clearing approximately 150 yards from the water's edge. The weather had been surprisingly cooperative, with partly cloudy skies and temperatures in the mid-50s during the day. Ethan had initially complained about the lack of cell phone service and Wi-Fi, but as the hours passed, Daniel noticed his son beginning to engage more with their surroundings. They'd caught several nice silver salmon, cooked them over an open fire, and spent their evenings talking more than they had in months. On the evening of June 1st, Marcus had spotted fresh bear sign during a scouting trip along the lake's western shore. He'd found tracks in the mud near a salmon stream, massive prints measuring nearly 12 inches long and 8 inches wide, with deep claw marks extending 4 inches beyond the toe pads. The tracks belonged to an adult male, what locals called a boar, and based on the size and depth of the impressions, Marcus estimated the animal's weight at well over 1,000 pounds. "We need to be extra careful tomorrow," Marcus told Daniel as they sat around their campfire that evening, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. "That's the biggest track I've seen in 3 years. A bear that size isn't afraid of anything, and with the salmon run starting to pick up, he's going to be focused on feeding. They're not thinking clearly when they're in that mode." Ethan looked up from the stick he'd been whittling with his knife, his expression suddenly serious. "How big are we talking about?" Marcus studied the boy's face in the firelight. "Big enough to flip a truck if he wanted to. These Kodiak bears, they're in a class by themselves. I've seen them move boulders that would take 3 men to budge, tear apart steel drum storage containers like they were made of cardboard. The thing people don't understand is that they're not just strong, they're fast. A bear that size can cover 50 yards in under 3 seconds. That's faster than you can run, faster than you can think, sometimes faster than you can even realize what's happening." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "Should we consider moving our camp?" "No," Marcus replied, shaking his head. "Moving now would be more dangerous than staying put. Bears are creatures of habit. They follow established travel routes, feeding patterns, territorial boundaries. If we stay put and follow proper protocols, we should be fine. But tomorrow, when we head out to that tributary on the north shore, we need to be absolutely vigilant. That's prime bear habitat, especially with the salmon starting to run." The tributary Marcus was referring to was Bear Creek, a small stream that fed into Karluk Lake from the northwest. The creek was renowned among anglers for its spectacular silver salmon fishing, but it was also known as one of the most dangerous areas on the island. The combination of dense brush, multiple bear trails, and concentrated fish populations created what wildlife biologists called a conflict zone, an area where human-bear encounters were not just possible but probable. That night, as they settled into their sleeping bags, Daniel found himself lying awake, listening to every sound in the darkness around their camp. The night was alive with noise. The gentle lapping of waves against the shoreline, the rustle of wind through spruce needles, the distant call of a loon across the water. But it was the silences between sounds that made his heart rate quicken, the moments when the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if something large and powerful was moving through the shadows, just beyond the reach of their campfire's dying embers. Ethan, in the sleeping bag beside him, seemed to have no such troubles. The boy had fallen asleep within minutes of zipping up his bag, his breathing deep and regular. Looking at his son's peaceful face in the dim light filtering through their tent, Daniel felt a powerful surge of protectiveness. Whatever dangers lurked in Kodiak's wilderness, he would keep Ethan safe. He was an experienced outdoorsman, well-equipped and properly trained. He had his rifle, his bear spray, and years of wilderness experience. They would fish Bear Creek in the morning, catch their limit of salmon, and return to camp with another successful day behind them. He had no way of knowing that at that very moment, less than 2 miles away, a massive Kodiak bear was following their scent trail back toward their camp. The bear that would soon change their lives forever was a mature male, approximately 12 years old, and weighing an estimated 1,247 pounds. Wildlife biologists would later designate him as bear number KI-47 in their incident report. But to understand what happened on June 2nd, it's crucial to understand this animal's background and behavior patterns. KI-47 had been born in the spring of 2013 to a female known to researchers as sow number 23, one of the largest and most successful breeding females in the Karluk Lake area. Like all Kodiak bear cubs, he had spent his first 2.5 years learning survival skills from his mother, how to fish for salmon, which plants were edible, how to identify threats and potential food sources, and most importantly, how to establish and defend territory. By the age of 3, when his mother drove him away to mate again, KI-47 had already reached 400 pounds and was showing signs of the exceptional size that would characterize his adult years. He established his initial territory along the western shore of Karluk Lake, an area rich in salmon streams and berry patches, but also heavily trafficked by other bears. The first few years of independence had been challenging. Smaller than the established males, he was frequently driven away from the best fishing spots and forced to forage in marginal habitat. But by his 7th year, KI-47 had achieved dominance over a prime territory covering nearly 20 square miles of the most productive bear habitat on Kodiak Island. His size and aggressive temperament allowed him to claim the best fishing spots during salmon runs, the richest berry patches in late summer, and the most secure denning sites for winter hibernation. Other bears, including females with cubs, gave him a wide berth. Even the island's human residents had learned to recognize his massive tracks and distinctive territorial markings. In the Wildlife Management Database, KI-47 was classified as a Level 3 bear, an animal with a history of aggressive behavior toward humans and property damage. Over the previous 5 years, he had been implicated in at least 8 incidents involving human encounters, including the destruction of 2 hunting cabins, multiple garbage raids in the outskirts of Kodiak City, and a terrifying encounter with a fishing guide and his clients that resulted in one man requiring 17 stitches after being knocked down by the bear's massive paw. The most concerning aspect of KI-47's behavior was his apparent lack of fear regarding humans. While most bears would retreat when they detected human scent or noise, KI-47 had demonstrated an increasingly bold pattern of investigation and confrontation. Wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been studying Kodiak bears for over 15 years, had specifically flagged KI-47 in her reports as an animal requiring constant monitoring. "This bear represents everything that makes Kodiak dangerous," Dr. Chen had written in her 2024 annual report. "He's achieved maximum physical size and strength, has established dominance over prime habitat, shows no fear of humans, and has demonstrated repeatedly that he will defend his territory aggressively. The combination of these factors makes him perhaps the most dangerous individual bear currently living on the island." On the evening of June 1st, while Daniel, Ethan and Marcus sat around their campfire discussing bear safety, Ki-47 was approximately 1.8 miles away, feeding on the carcass of a young caribou that had died from natural causes near the mouth of Bear Creek. The massive bear had claimed the carcass 2 days earlier, driving off a smaller male and a sow with 2 yearlings who had also been interested in the easy meal. He had been feeding intermittently on the caribou, but his attention had been increasingly drawn to new scents carried on the evening wind. The combination of human scent, cooking food, and unfamiliar sounds from Daniel's camp had triggered Ki-47's curiosity and territorial instincts. Unlike the brief visits of day hikers or researchers who typically moved through his territory quickly, these humans had established a permanent presence in what he considered his domain. Their scent was growing stronger rather than weaker, indicating they intended to remain in the area. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on June 1st, Ki-47 began moving toward the source of the human scent. His massive form moved through the dense forest with surprising stealth, an adaptation that allowed bears to approach prey or investigate potential threats without detection. Despite weighing over 1,200 pounds, he could move through thick brush with barely a sound, his huge paws finding purchase on logs and rocks with the practiced ease of an animal that had spent its entire life navigating challenging terrain. As Ki-47 approached to within 400 yards of the camp, he detected something that stopped him cold, the scent of a human male in his prime, along with the younger scent of an adolescent. But there was also something else, the metallic smell of firearms, the chemical signatures of camping equipment, and most intriguingly, the lingering aroma of cooked salmon. The bear's brain, evolved over millennia to process complex scent information, began building a detailed picture of the humans who had invaded his territory. For over 2 hours, Ki-47 circled the camp at a distance, gathering information through scent, sound, and occasional visual confirmation. He observed the dying campfire, the placement of their tent, the location of their gear, and most importantly, the routine and habits of the 3 humans. By 2:15 a.m., when the last sounds from the camp had faded and the fire had burned down to glowing coals, Ki-47 had developed what wildlife behaviorists call an encounter plan. The massive bear bedded down approximately 200 yards northwest of the camp, in a dense thicket of alders that provided both concealment and an excellent view of the humans' morning activities. His plan, insofar as a bear could be said to plan, was to monitor the humans through the following day and determine whether they represented a threat to his territory, a potential food source, or simply temporary visitors who would leave his domain without conflict. He could not have known that the humans were planning to visit Bear Creek the following morning, the very heart of his most jealously guarded territory, and the location where his territorial instincts would overrule any possibility of peaceful coexistence. As the first grey light of dawn began to filter through the forest canopy on June 2nd, Daniel Reeves was already awake, listening to the subtle sounds that marked the transition from night to day in Alaska's wilderness. The loons had fallen silent, replaced by the chittering of squirrels and the distant splash of salmon jumping in the lake. Beside him, Ethan was still sleeping soundly, but Marcus was stirring in his sleeping bag, the veteran guide's internal clock, attuned to the rhythms of the wilderness. "Morning," Marcus whispered, as he unzipped his sleeping bag with practiced quiet. "How'd you sleep?" "Like a baby," Daniel lied, not wanting to admit that he'd spent most of the night listening for sounds that might indicate a bear's presence. "What's the weather looking like?" Marcus unzipped the tent flap and peered outside. The morning was overcast but stable, with minimal wind and temperatures in the upper 40s. Perfect conditions for fishing, but also perfect conditions for bears to be active along the salmon streams. "Should be a good day for fishing," he said, "but we'll want to get an early start. The fish are most active in the morning, and it'll give us time to get back to camp before the bears start moving around for their evening feeding." They woke Ethan gently, and within an hour had broken down their gear and loaded it into Daniel's brand new Ford F-250 Super Duty pickup truck. The truck, purchased just 3 months earlier for $85,347 from Kendall Ford in Anchorage, was Daniel's pride and joy. Finished in Oxford white with a black interior, it featured a 6.7-litre Powerstroke diesel engine, advanced four-wheel drive system, and every available option, including adaptive cruise control, a premium sound system, and heated and cooled seats. Daniel had specifically chosen the Super Duty for its capability in Alaska's challenging terrain, and the truck had performed flawlessly during their journey to Karluk Lake. The drive to Bear Creek required navigating approximately 8 miles of rough, unpaved roads that wound through dense forest and across several creek crossings. The road, barely wide enough for one vehicle, had been carved out of the wilderness decades earlier to provide access to remote fishing areas, but it was poorly maintained and featured numerous obstacles, including fallen trees, washouts, and sections where the track was little more than parallel ruts through the undergrowth. Daniel engaged the truck's four-wheel drive system as they left their camp at 7:23 a.m., the diesel engine growling confidently as they began climbing the first of several steep grades. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his earlier reluctance replaced by genuine excitement as they bounced and lurched along the primitive road. Marcus, seated behind Daniel, kept up a running commentary about the terrain, wildlife signs, and potential fishing spots. "See those claw marks on that spruce tree?" Marcus pointed to a massive tree approximately 30 feet from the road. The trunk bore deep gouges extending from about 4 feet to nearly 9 feet above the ground. "That's a territorial marking. Male bear, and a big one based on how high those marks go. They do that to advertise their presence to other bears, kind of like a no trespassing sign." Ethan craned his neck to get a better look at the marks. "How recent are those?" "Hard to say exactly, but the wood looks fresh. Could be from yesterday, could be from last week, but definitely recent enough that we know there's a big male working this area." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "This is exactly why we need to stay alert today. We're not just visitors out here, we're trespassers in someone else's neighborhood." The road continued to climb through increasingly dense forest, with visibility limited to perhaps 50 yards in any direction due to the thick understory of alders, devil's club, and salmonberry bushes. The forest floor was carpeted with decades of fallen needles and leaves, creating a soft, spongy surface that muffled sound, but also concealed tracks and other signs of wildlife activity. At 7:51 a.m., they reached the turnoff for Bear Creek, marked only by a small wooden sign weathered nearly to illegibility and a slightly wider area where vehicles could turn around. Daniel carefully maneuvered the F-250 through the tight turn and began descending toward the creek, the truck's suspension working hard to absorb the impacts from rocks and roots embedded in the roadway. The final half-mile to Bear Creek was the most challenging section of the journey, with the road dropping steeply through a series of switchbacks before leveling out near the stream. As they descended, the sound of running water grew steadily louder, and the air became noticeably cooler and more humid. The forest canopy closed in overhead, creating a tunnel effect that blocked most of the morning light and gave the area a primordial, almost cathedral-like atmosphere. At 8:07 a.m., they reached the small parking area adjacent to Bear Creek, a cleared space barely large enough for 3 vehicles, surrounded by towering spruce and hemlock trees. The creek itself was approximately 30 yards wide at this point, running clear and cold over a bed of smooth stones and gravel. Even from the parking area, they could see salmon moving in the deeper pools, their silver flanks flashing as they swam upstream toward their spawning grounds. "This is perfect," Daniel said as he shut off the truck's engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the sound of running water and the gentle rustle of wind through the treetops. "Look at those fish." Marcus climbed out of the truck and immediately began scanning the surrounding forest, his experienced eyes looking for any signs of wildlife activity. The area showed extensive evidence of bear presence: tracks in the soft earth near the stream, scat deposits containing salmon bones and berry seeds, and several well-worn trails leading through the brush. Most concerning were the territorial markings on trees throughout the area, indicating that this was not just bear habitat, but the core territory of at least one dominant male. "Dad, look at this!" Ethan called from near the creek bank. He was pointing to a massive track in the mud, so fresh that water was still seeping into the impression. The track measured nearly 13 inches from heel to toe, with deep claw marks extending several inches beyond the toe pads. Daniel and Marcus hurried to examine the track, and Marcus felt his blood pressure spike as he realized the implications. This wasn't just any bear track. Based on the size and distinctive characteristics, it belonged to the same animal whose sign they'd been seeing throughout the area. But the freshness of the track meant the bear had been here very recently, possibly within the last hour. "We need to make a decision," Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice calm to avoid alarming Ethan. "This track is fresh enough that the bear could still be in the immediate area. We can either pack up and leave now, or we can proceed with extreme caution." Daniel felt torn between his desire to give Ethan the fishing experience he'd promised and his growing concern about the bear situation. They'd driven 8 miles over challenging terrain to reach this spot, and the fishing was clearly going to be spectacular. But Marcus's tone suggested that the level of risk was higher than they'd anticipated. "What's your professional recommendation?" Daniel asked. Marcus studied the track again, then scanned the surrounding forest. "If we stay, we follow strict protocols. We fish close to the truck, we make noise constantly, we have bear spray and your rifle immediately accessible, and at the first sign of a bear, we retreat to the vehicle. And I mean the first sign. We don't wait to see how big it is or whether it's showing aggressive behavior." Ethan looked back and forth between the two men, beginning to sense the tension in their voices. Is it really that dangerous? I mean, we have bear spray and Dad's rifle, right? "Bear spray is effective against most bears," Marcus explained, "but it has a range of only about 25 feet, and it requires you to be facing the bear when you deploy it. Your dad's rifle is certainly capable of stopping a bear, but it requires accurate shot placement under extreme stress. The thing is, a big bear can cover a lot of ground very quickly. If we're not paying attention, if we let our guard down for even a few seconds, we could find ourselves in a situation where our defensive tools aren't enough." Daniel made his decision. "We'll stay for 2 hours, catch what we can, and keep our eyes open. But at the first sign of trouble, we're out of here." They began unloading their fishing gear from the truck, but Marcus insisted on additional precautions. He positioned Daniel's rifle in the truck's cab, where it could be accessed quickly, clipped bear spray to his belt and Daniel's belt, and established clear protocols for maintaining situational awareness. They would fish in a tight group, never more than 10 yards apart, and they would rotate responsibility for watching the surrounding forest, while the others focused on fishing. At 8:34 a.m., they made their first casts into Bear Creek, and the fishing was everything Daniel had hoped it would be. The salmon were aggressive and plentiful, and within the first 30 minutes, Ethan had landed 3 beautiful silver salmon, each weighing between 8 and 12 pounds. His earlier concerns about the bear situation faded as he became caught up in the excitement of the fishing, his laughter echoing across the creek as he battled each fish. Daniel found himself relaxing as well, caught up in the joy of watching his son experience such spectacular fishing. This was exactly what he'd hoped for from their trip, a shared adventure that would create lasting memories and bring them closer together. As the morning progressed and no bears appeared, the immediate danger began to seem less threatening. But Marcus remained vigilant, his years of experience telling him that the absence of visible bears didn't mean they were safe. If anything, the fresh tracks and extensive sign in the area suggested they were in the heart of prime bear habitat during the peak feeding season. He continued to scan the forest regularly, looking for any movement or sign that might indicate an approaching bear. At 9:47 a.m., Marcus spotted something that made his stomach clench with fear. Approximately 150 yards upstream, at the edge of his vision through the forest, he caught a glimpse of dark brown fur moving through the trees. The movement was brief, barely more than a shadow, but it was unmistakably large and bear-like. "Daniel," Marcus said quietly, trying to keep his voice calm, "we need to start packing up now." "What?" "Why? The fishing is incredible. I think I just saw a bear moving upstream. We need to get back to the truck." Daniel looked in the direction Marcus was indicating, but the dense forest revealed nothing. "Are you sure?" "I don't see anything. I'm sure enough that we need to leave. Trust me on this." Ethan looked up from his fishing, disappointed. "But I just hooked into something big. Can't we stay a few more minutes?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're leaving now." As they began packing their gear, Marcus kept glancing upstream, looking for any sign of the movement he'd detected earlier. The forest appeared peaceful, but he knew that meant nothing. Bears were masters of moving through dense cover without being detected, and a large male investigating their presence might observe them for extended periods before deciding whether to approach or withdraw. They had most of their gear packed into the truck when Marcus spotted the bear again, this time much closer, perhaps 75 yards away and moving directly toward them. The massive animal was following the creek bank, its enormous head swinging back and forth as it tested the air for scents. Even at that distance, Marcus could see that this was an exceptionally large bear, with a distinctive blonde patch on its chest and shoulders that were broader than any bear he'd encountered in 23 years of guiding. "Get in the truck," Marcus said urgently. "Right now." Daniel looked upstream and saw the bear for the first time. The animal was massive beyond his imagination, moving with deceptive speed despite its enormous size. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was suddenly small and frightened. "Get in the truck, Ethan. Now." They threw the remaining gear into the truck bed and climbed into the cab, Daniel starting the engine immediately. But as he put the truck in reverse to back out of the parking area, the bear's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of continuing along the creek bank, the animal turned directly toward them and began approaching at a purposeful walk. "Why is it coming toward us?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with fear. "It's investigating," Marcus replied, his hand on the door handle. "Sometimes they'll approach vehicles out of curiosity. The key is to not make any sudden movements or loud noises." But as the bear closed to within 50 yards, it became clear that this was not simple curiosity. The animal's posture was aggressive, head lowered, ears back, the distinctive shoulder hump that marked it as a brown bear prominent above its massive neck. Its gait had changed from a walk to a purposeful stride, and it was making direct eye contact with the occupants of the truck. "Back up," Marcus said urgently. "Back up slowly." Daniel shifted into reverse and began backing out of the parking area, but the narrow turnaround space and the bear's continued approach made maneuvering difficult. The truck's backup camera showed the bear clearly now, a massive wall of brown fur and muscle that filled the entire screen. At 30 yards, the bear broke into a charge. The speed was shocking. The enormous animal covered the remaining distance in less than 3 seconds, moving faster than Daniel would have believed possible for something so massive. There was no time to fully reverse out of the parking area, no time to turn around, no time to do anything except watch in horror as 1,247 pounds of apex predator launched itself at their vehicle. The bear struck the truck's front end with tremendous force, the impact rocking the entire vehicle and spiderwebbing the windshield. Daniel felt the steering wheel jerk in his hands as the front wheels lifted off the ground. The truck's suspension compressed to its limits by the bear's weight and momentum. "Holy shit!" Ethan screamed. The bear, apparently stunned by the impact, backed away for a moment, shaking its massive head. Daniel saw his opportunity and floored the accelerator in reverse, the truck's diesel engine roaring as he tried to back away from the animal. But they had moved less than 10 feet when the bear attacked again, this time focusing on the driver's side of the vehicle. The second impact was even more violent than the first. The bear reared up on its hind legs and brought its full weight down on the truck's hood, the sheet metal crumpling like paper under the massive paws. The windshield shattered completely, sending a shower of safety glass into the cab. "The rifle!" Marcus shouted. "Get the rifle!" But the rifle was pinned behind Daniel's seat, inaccessible, while the bear was actively attacking the vehicle. The animal seemed determined to get at the occupants, using its massive paws to tear at the truck's body panels and windows. Each blow left deep gouges in the metal and sent shockwaves through the frame. The most terrifying moment came when the bear managed to get its claws under the truck's frame and began to lift. The massive animal's strength was beyond anything Daniel had imagined. The front end of the 8,000-pound truck actually rose several inches off the ground as the bear attempted to flip the vehicle. "It's trying to flip us over!" Ethan screamed. Daniel gunned the engine again, but with the front wheels off the ground, the truck couldn't gain traction. They were trapped at the mercy of an animal whose strength defied comprehension. The bear continued to rock the truck, each movement threatening to tip them over onto their side or roof. It was then that Marcus made a decision that would save Ethan's life, but cost Daniel his own. Seeing that the bear was focused on the driver's side of the vehicle, Marcus opened the passenger door and jumped out, shouting and waving his arms to draw the animal's attention away from Daniel and Ethan. "Hey! Hey! Over here!" The bear immediately turned toward Marcus, dropping the truck back onto its wheels with a crash. For a moment, the guide and the bear faced each other across 20 feet of open ground, and Marcus could see intelligence in the animal's dark eyes. Not the mindless aggression he'd expected, but the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating a threat. Marcus had his bear spray ready, but he knew from experience that the canister's effective range was limited, and he would have only one chance to deploy it effectively. The bear began moving toward him with that same purposeful stride it had used when approaching the truck, and Marcus realized with crystal clarity that he was about to die. But in that moment of absolute terror, Marcus heard the truck's engine rev behind him, and he knew Daniel was taking the opportunity to escape with Ethan. That knowledge gave him the courage to stand his ground for the additional seconds needed to ensure they could get away. The bear reached Marcus in 3 bounds. The first blow from its massive paw caught him in the chest, lifting him completely off the ground and sending him flying backward into a large spruce tree. Marcus felt ribs crack and his left arm break, but somehow managed to deploy his bear spray as the animal approached for a second attack. The pressurized capsaicin caught the bear full in the face, and the animal reeled backward, pawing at its eyes and snorting in obvious distress. But the spray's effect, while immediate, was temporary. Within seconds, the bear was shaking its head clear and looking around for the source of its irritation. Marcus tried to crawl away, but his injuries made movement nearly impossible. The bear found him easily, and what happened next was mercifully brief. The massive animal used its paws and teeth to inflict injuries that would have been fatal within minutes, even if emergency medical care had been immediately available. Daniel heard Marcus's screams as he finally managed to get the truck turned around and began driving away from the creek. The sounds were barely human, filled with a terror and agony that would haunt both Daniel and Ethan for the rest of their lives. But there was nothing Daniel could do. Stopping would have meant death for all three of them. The truck was badly damaged but still functional, the diesel engine running strong, despite the crumpled hood and destroyed windshield. Daniel drove as fast as he dared over the rough road, expecting at any moment to see the massive bear charging after them. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, he could see only empty road behind them. "Is Marcus—" Ethan couldn't finish the question. "I don't know," Daniel lied, knowing with terrible certainty that their guide was dead. "We need to get back to camp and call for help." But their ordeal was far from over. As they climbed the steep switchbacks leading away from Bear Creek, Daniel began to notice that the truck's handling was becoming increasingly erratic. The bear's attack had damaged more than just the body panels. Fluid was leaking from somewhere under the hood, and the steering was pulling hard to the left. At 10:23 a.m., approximately 2 miles from Bear Creek, the truck's engine began to overheat. The temperature gauge climbed steadily into the red zone, and steam began rising from under the crumpled hood. Daniel knew they had to stop before the engine seized completely, but the thought of being stranded in the forest with that massive bear somewhere behind them was terrifying. He managed to reach a slightly wider section of road before the engine finally died, steam pouring from the radiator and various other fluids pooling under the chassis. They were still more than 6 miles from their base camp, with no means of transportation and no way to call for help. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked, his voice small and frightened. Daniel took inventory of their situation. They had his rifle and remaining ammunition, 2 canisters of bear spray, their emergency beacon, some water, and the energy bars they'd packed for the fishing trip. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough to get them back to camp and their satellite communication equipment. "We walk," Daniel said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "It's only 6 miles and we know the way. We'll stay on the road, make plenty of noise, and be back at camp in a couple of hours." But as they began walking up the road, both carrying emergency gear and staying close together, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed too quiet, as if the normal wildlife had gone into hiding. Every shadow could conceal a massive predator. Every sound might be the approach of death on 4 legs. They had walked approximately 1 mile when Ethan noticed fresh tracks in a muddy section of road. The prints were unmistakably from the same bear that had attacked them at the creek, but these tracks were heading in their direction of travel, parallel to the road, but offset into the forest by perhaps 50 yards. "Dad," Ethan whispered, pointing to the tracks. "It's following us." Daniel examined the tracks and felt his heart rate spike. The prints were indeed fresh, made within the last hour, and they showed that the bear was moving in the same direction they were traveling. But more concerning was the pattern of the tracks. They weren't the random wandering of a bear going about its normal business, but the purposeful stride of an animal following a specific scent trail. "Stay calm," Daniel said, though his own voice was tight with fear. "We'll keep moving, but we need to be ready." He checked his rifle, ensuring that a round was chambered and the safety was off. The Winchester Model 70 was loaded with premium ammunition specifically designed for dangerous game, and Daniel was confident in his marksmanship abilities. But he also knew that a charging bear could cover a lot of ground very quickly, and he would have time for only 1 or 2 shots at most. They continued walking, but their pace became more urgent as the reality of their situation sank in. They were being stalked by one of the most dangerous predators in North America, in terrain that heavily favored the bear, with limited ammunition and no backup plan if their defensive measures failed. At 11:17 a.m., they reached a section of road that passed through particularly dense forest, with visibility limited to perhaps 20 yards in any direction. It was here that Ki-47 made his second appearance, stepping out of the forest directly onto the road, approximately 40 yards ahead of them. The bear was even more massive than Daniel remembered from the creek. Standing on all fours, its shoulder height was nearly 4 feet, and its body length appeared to be over 8 feet from nose to tail. The animal's fur was thick and glossy, colored in various shades of brown, with that distinctive blonde highlighting around the shoulders and chest. Its head was enormous, broader than a man's shoulders, with small, dark eyes that seemed to hold an unsettling intelligence. For a long moment, bear and humans faced each other across the narrow road. Daniel slowly raised his rifle, trying to get a clear sight picture while fighting against the adrenaline that made his hands shake. Ethan pressed close behind his father, and Daniel could feel the boy trembling against his back. "Easy," Daniel whispered, though whether he was talking to Ethan the bear or himself was unclear. The bear began walking toward them, its movement deliberate and unhurried. This wasn't the explosive charge they'd witnessed at the creek. This was the approach of a confident predator that had already decided on a course of action. Daniel waited until the bear closed to 25 yards before firing his first shot. The .300 Winchester Magnum round struck the animal in the upper chest. The 180 grain bullet, designed to penetrate deep into vital organs. The bear staggered from the impact, but didn't go down, instead rising up on its hind legs and bellowing in rage and pain. Standing upright, the bear was over 9 feet tall, its massive arms spread wide as it roared its fury. Daniel could see blood on the animal's chest fur, indicating that his shot had found its mark, but the bear showed no signs of being mortally wounded. Daniel fired his second shot as the bear dropped back to all fours and resumed its charge. This shot aimed at the animal's head. But a charging bear is an extremely difficult target, and the bullet struck high, creasing the skull but failing to penetrate the brain. The bear reached them in less than 2 seconds. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The massive animal struck Daniel with its shoulder, lifting him completely off the ground and sending him flying backward into the forest. Daniel felt his rifle torn from his hands as he crashed through a thicket of alders, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. Ethan screamed as he watched his father disappear into the brush, but his terror reached new heights when the bear turned its attention to him. The massive predator was bleeding from both wounds Daniel had inflicted, but neither injury appeared to be life-threatening. If anything, the pain seemed to have made the animal even more aggressive. The bear approached Ethan at a walk, its head lowered and its eyes fixed on the terrified boy. Ethan had dropped to his knees in the middle of the road, paralyzed by fear and the absolute certainty that he was about to die. The animal was so massive that its head was nearly level with Ethan's, even though the boy was standing on his knees. What happened next would be debated by wildlife experts for years to come. Instead of immediately attacking Ethan, the bear stopped approximately 5 feet away and seemed to study the boy. For nearly 30 seconds, predator and victim stared at each other, and some witnesses to similar encounters have suggested that bears occasionally show something approaching curiosity or even empathy toward young humans. But Ki-47's moment of hesitation ended when Daniel's voice rang out from the forest where he had landed. "Ethan! Run!" The bear's head swiveled toward the sound, and in that instant of distraction, Ethan found his courage. The boy rolled sideways off the road and into the dense undergrowth on the opposite side from where his father had disappeared. The vegetation was so thick that he was immediately concealed from the bear's view, but he could hear the massive animal crashing through the brush behind him. Daniel, meanwhile, was attempting to reach his rifle, which had landed approximately 20 feet from where he'd come to rest after the bear's charge. His left shoulder was dislocated and several ribs were cracked, but adrenaline allowed him to function despite the pain. He could hear Ethan crashing through the forest nearby and the bear in pursuit, and he knew that he had only seconds to act. The rifle had landed in a patch of devil's club, its barrel partially buried under fallen leaves. Daniel grabbed the weapon with his good arm and checked to ensure that the action was still functional. The Winchester appeared undamaged despite its violent journey through the forest, and Daniel quickly worked the bolt to chamber another round. He could hear the bear getting closer to Ethan's position, guided by the sounds of the boy's panicked flight through the dense undergrowth. Daniel knew that Ethan's only chance was for him to draw the bear's attention back to himself, even though doing so would almost certainly result in his own death. "Over here!" Daniel shouted, firing a shot into the air to ensure the bear would locate him. "Come on!" The massive predator immediately changed direction, abandoning its pursuit of Ethan to focus on Daniel. The animal burst through the undergrowth with shocking speed, its bulk seeming to part the dense vegetation like water. Daniel's third shot caught the bear center mass at a range of less than 15 feet. The heavy bullet struck just behind the animal's front shoulder, a placement that should have pierced both lungs and possibly the heart. The bear stumbled but kept coming, and Daniel realized with horror that even perfectly placed shots might not be enough to stop an animal of this size and determination. His fourth shot, fired when the bear was less than 10 feet away, struck the animal in the neck, severing major blood vessels and finally beginning to slow the massive predator. But the bear's momentum carried it forward, and its massive paw struck Daniel in the head with crushing force. Daniel Reeves died instantly, his skull fractured by the impact of a paw that weighed more than his entire head. The bear, mortally wounded by the combination of 4 high-powered rifle rounds, collapsed on top of Daniel's body and died within minutes from massive internal bleeding. Ethan, hidden in the dense undergrowth approximately 60 yards away, heard the final shots and then a sudden, profound silence. For over an hour, he remained motionless in his hiding place, too terrified to move and unsure whether the bear was dead or simply waiting for him to reveal his location. It was not until 12:47 p.m. that Ethan finally found the courage to emerge from his hiding place and attempt to locate his father. What he found in a small clearing surrounded by dense alders would haunt him for the rest of his life. The massive brown form of the bear lying across his father's motionless body, both predator and prey united in death. Ethan's screams echoed across the forest as the full reality of the situation crashed down on him. His father was dead, their guide was dead, their truck was disabled, and he was alone in one of the most dangerous wilderness areas in North America, with no means of communication and no way to call for help. The 14-year-old boy, who just hours earlier had been excited about fishing and adventure, now faced the challenge of surviving alone in the Alaskan wilderness while processing the traumatic loss of his father. His actions over the next several hours would determine whether the tragic encounter with KY-47 would claim 1 life or 3. The first priority was the emergency beacon that Daniel had been carrying in his backpack. Ethan found the pack approximately 20 feet from where his father's body lay, and with shaking hands, he activated the personal locator beacon that would send a distress signal to search and rescue authorities. The device immediately began transmitting their GPS coordinates along with an emergency code indicating a life-threatening situation. But even with the beacon activated, Ethan knew that rescue could take many hours, especially given their remote location and the challenging terrain that would face any rescue team. He needed to focus on immediate survival priorities, shelter, water, and protection from other wildlife that might be attracted to the scent of blood. Using survival skills his father had taught him during camping trips in Montana, Ethan began gathering materials for a temporary shelter. He found a fallen log that would provide a windbreak and began covering it with spruce boughs to create insulation from the cold ground. His movements were mechanical, his mind still struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan could hear aircraft overhead, single-engine planes that he hoped were part of a search effort launched in response to his beacon. But the dense forest canopy made it impossible for aircraft to spot him from above, and he lacked the materials to create a signal fire that might attract their attention. At 4:23 p.m., nearly 6 hours after the bear attack, Ethan heard the most beautiful sound of his life: human voices calling his name through the forest. A search team from the Alaska State Troopers, working in coordination with local search and rescue volunteers, had been following the beacon signal and had finally reached the area where the attack occurred. "Help!" Ethan screamed, his voice hoarse from hours of crying and fear. "I'm here! Help me!" The rescue team, led by Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, reached Ethan within minutes of hearing his voice. The experienced law enforcement officer took one look at the scene: the massive dead bear, Daniel's body, and the traumatized boy, and immediately called for additional resources including crime scene investigators, wildlife biologists, and a helicopter equipped for medical evacuation. "Are you injured?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked Ethan, conducting a quick visual assessment for obvious wounds. "I don't think so," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "The bear killed my dad. It killed Marcus, too, back at the creek. We tried to get away, but it followed us. Dad shot it, but it wouldn't stop." The sergeant could see that while Ethan appeared physically uninjured, the boy was in severe psychological shock. His responses were delayed and disconnected, and he seemed to be having difficulty processing questions or focusing on specific topics. Rodriguez had seen similar reactions in other trauma victims, and he knew that immediate medical evaluation would be crucial. "What's your full name, son?" Rodriguez asked gently. "Ethan James Reeves. My dad is Daniel Reeves. Was Daniel Reeves." The boy's voice broke as the reality of using past tense struck him again. "Okay, Ethan. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and make sure you're okay. But I need you to stay with me and answer some questions, all right?" Over the next 30 minutes, as additional rescue personnel arrived at the scene, Ethan provided a basic account of the morning's events. His narrative was disjointed and sometimes contradictory, but it painted a clear picture of an unprovoked attack by an exceptionally large and aggressive bear that had resulted in multiple fatalities. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a paramedic with over 15 years of experience in wilderness rescue, conducted a thorough medical evaluation of Ethan, while crime scene investigators photographed the attack site and wildlife biologists examined the dead bear. While Ethan showed no signs of physical injury, Dr. Walsh was concerned about his psychological condition and recommended immediate evacuation to Anchorage for comprehensive medical and psychiatric evaluation. "He's in shock," Dr. Walsh reported to Sergeant Rodriguez. "His vital signs are stable, but he's showing classic symptoms of acute stress reaction. He needs to be in a hospital environment where he can receive proper psychological support." The helicopter evacuation of Ethan began at 6:15 p.m., nearly 8 hours after the initial attack. As the aircraft lifted off from a small clearing approximately half a mile from the attack site, Ethan got his final view of the forest where his father had died. The sight of the dense green canopy, stretching endlessly in all directions, reinforced the isolation and danger of the place where their adventure had turned into tragedy. During the 47-minute flight to Anchorage, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, the adrenaline that had sustained him through the day finally wearing off. Dr. Walsh monitored his condition carefully, but his symptoms remained consistent with severe psychological trauma rather than physical injury. The helicopter landed at Providence, Alaska Medical Center at 7:02 p.m., where a full medical team was standing by. Ethan was immediately taken to the emergency department for comprehensive evaluation, while Dr. Walsh briefed the attending physicians on his condition and the circumstances of the rescue. Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending emergency physician, conducted a thorough physical examination and found no evidence of injuries beyond minor scratches and bruises from Ethan's flight through the forest. However, psychological evaluation revealed symptoms consistent with acute stress disorder. And Dr. Kim recommended immediate admission to the hospital's psychiatric unit for observation and treatment. He's been through an extraordinarily traumatic experience, Dr. Kim explained to Patricia Reeves, Ethan's mother, who had flown to Anchorage immediately upon receiving notification of the incident. Physically, he's fine, but psychologically, he's going to need significant support to process what he's experienced. Patricia had received the phone call that every parent dreads at 3:47 p.m. when Alaska State Troopers contacted her to report that there had been a serious incident involving her ex-husband and son. The initial call had been maddeningly vague. Officials couldn't provide details until next of kin had been notified and the scene had been secured. But Patricia knew from the troopers' tone that something terrible had happened. The 6-hour flight from Seattle to Anchorage had been the longest of Patricia's life. Unable to get additional information about Daniel or Ethan's condition, she had been forced to imagine every possible scenario, most of them ending with the loss of one or both of the most important people in her life. When she finally arrived at Providence, Alaska Medical Center and learned that Ethan was alive and physically uninjured, her relief was overwhelming. But seeing her son in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the ceiling with no reaction to her presence, Patricia realized that while Ethan had survived the bear attack physically, the psychological damage might take years to heal. "Ethan," she said softly, taking his hand. "Honey, it's Mom. You're safe now." Ethan's eyes focused on her face, and for a moment, she saw recognition and relief. But then his expression crumpled, and he began crying with an intensity that broke Patricia's heart. "Dad's dead, Mom. The bear killed him. I couldn't help him. I ran away and left him to die." Patricia held her son as he sobbed, her own tears flowing as she tried to find words of comfort. But what could she say? Daniel was dead, killed in one of the most violent ways imaginable, and their 14-year-old son had witnessed it all. Dr. Kim had warned Patricia that survivor's guilt was common in situations like this, and that Ethan would likely blame himself for his father's death despite having no realistic ability to change the outcome. The psychological impact of witnessing such violence, combined with the guilt of surviving when others didn't, could lead to long-term mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. "It's not your fault," Patricia whispered to her son. "None of this is your fault. Your dad would want you to know that." But even as she spoke the words, Patricia wondered how they would ever move forward from this tragedy. Daniel was gone, their son was traumatized, and she was suddenly facing the prospect of single motherhood under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The hospital staff arranged for Patricia to stay overnight in Ethan's room, and she spent the night watching her son sleep fitfully, his dreams apparently plagued by nightmares that caused him to cry out and thrash in his bed. Each outburst broke her heart a little more, and she began to understand that the bear attack had claimed 2 victims. Daniel had died instantly, but Ethan would be dying slowly, one nightmare at a time. While Ethan was being treated at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, the investigation into the bear attack was continuing at the scene. Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologist Dr. Sarah Chen had arrived at the attack site at 8:30 p.m., and her examination of the dead bear confirmed what the tracks and witness statements had already suggested. This was an exceptionally large and aggressive male that had been involved in previous incidents with humans. "This is Bear KU-47, Dr. Chen informed Sergeant Rodriguez as she examined the animal's distinctive markings and scars. "We've been tracking this individual for over 5 years. He's been involved in at least 8 previous incidents involving human encounters or property damage. The bear's massive size was even more impressive in death than it had been in life. Measuring 8 feet 4 inches from nose to tail and weighing an estimated 1,247 pounds, KI-47 was among the largest bears ever documented on Kodiak Island. The animal showed signs of advanced age, including worn teeth and old scars from territorial disputes with other bears, but appeared to have been in excellent health at the time of the attack. Dr. Chen's preliminary examination revealed 4 bullet wounds, all from Daniel's .300 Winchester Magnum rifle. 2 of the wounds, in the chest and neck, had been fatal, but the bear's massive size and bone density had allowed it to continue fighting despite mortal injuries. "These are perfect shot placements," Dr. Chen observed, examining the wound patterns. "This man did everything right. He used appropriate ammunition, he aimed for vital areas, and he stood his ground to protect his son. But sometimes, with a bear this size and this determined, even perfect shooting isn't enough to stop an attack immediately." The recovery of Marcus Thompson's body from Bear Creek required a separate rescue operation, as the location was accessible only on foot, and the scene needed to be secured for investigation. A team of Alaska State Troopers and Fish and Game officers reached the creek site at 11:45 p.m., guided by GPS coordinates provided by Ethan and using powerful floodlights to navigate the treacherous terrain in darkness. What they found confirmed Ethan's account of the guide's heroic sacrifice. Marcus's body showed evidence of a massive bear attack, but his position relative to Daniel's damaged truck indicated that he had deliberately drawn the bear away from his clients. The bear spray canister was found nearby, deployed but empty, suggesting that Marcus had managed to use his defensive weapon before succumbing to the animal's attack. "He saved their lives," Sergeant Rodriguez reported to his supervisors. "If he hadn't gotten out of that truck and drawn the bear's attention, all 3 of them would have died right there at the creek." The investigation team also documented the extensive damage to Daniel's Ford F-250, providing dramatic evidence of the bear's incredible strength and determination. The truck's front end was completely destroyed, with the hood crumpled like paper and the windshield shattered. Deep claw marks gouged the metal of the doors and fenders, and the frame itself was bent from the bear's attempts to flip the vehicle. Insurance investigators who examined the truck the following day estimated the damage at over $75,000, essentially totaling the vehicle that Daniel had purchased just 3 months earlier. But the truck's robust construction had undoubtedly saved the lives of its occupants during the initial attack, providing crucial protection that allowed them to escape the immediate danger at Bear Creek. By dawn on June 3rd, both bodies had been recovered and transported to Anchorage for autopsy. The official cause of death for both Daniel Reeves and Marcus Thompson was listed as multiple traumatic injuries, consistent with bear attack, but those clinical terms could hardly capture the violence and terror of their final moments. The Alaska State Medical Examiner's Office conducted thorough autopsies on both victims, documenting the extent of their injuries for the official investigation. Daniel's autopsy revealed that he had died instantly from massive skull fractures caused by the bear's paw striking his head with an estimated force of over 2,000 pounds per square inch. Marcus's injuries were more extensive, indicating that he had survived the initial attack for several minutes before succumbing to massive blood loss. The bear's carcass was also transported to Anchorage for necropsy, where veterinary pathologists would examine the animal's health, diet, and behavior patterns in an attempt to understand what had triggered such aggressive behavior. Tissue samples would be tested for diseases that might affect bear behavior, including rabies, chronic wasting disease, and various parasitic infections. Dr. Chen's preliminary examination of the bear's stomach contents revealed partially digested salmon, berries, and vegetation, a normal diet for a Kodiak bear during early summer. There was no evidence of human remains, indicating that the attack had been territorial rather than predatory. The bear had not been trying to eat the humans, but rather to eliminate what it perceived as threats to its territory. This was classic defensive aggression, Dr. Chen explained in her initial report. The bear was protecting territory that it considered its own, and when the humans failed to retreat, it escalated to lethal force. The size and age of this animal, combined with its previous history of aggressive encounters, made it particularly dangerous. The investigation also revealed that K-Myad 47 had been scheduled for relocation or euthanization later in the summer due to its increasingly aggressive behavior toward humans. Wildlife managers had been monitoring the bear's activities and had documented its involvement in multiple incidents over the previous 2 years. However, the complex logistics of capturing and relocating such a large bear, combined with budget constraints and competing priorities, had delayed action until it was too late. "We knew this bear was dangerous," admitted Fish and Game area biologist Robert Stevens in an interview with the Anchorage Daily News. "We had plans to deal with him, but we ran out of time. This tragedy might have been prevented if we had acted sooner." The admission sparked immediate controversy and calls for investigation into the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's wildlife management practices. Critics argued that known dangerous bears should be removed immediately, rather than being allowed to remain in areas where human encounters were likely. Supporters of the agency pointed out that Kodiak Island was home to over 3,000 brown bears, and that removing every animal that showed aggressive tendencies would be impractical and ecologically damaging. News of the bear attack began spreading beyond Alaska within hours of the incident, as details of the dramatic encounter were picked up by national news services. The combination of factors, a father and son adventure gone wrong, a heroic guide's sacrifice, and the involvement of one of the world's largest predators, created a story that captured public attention across the United States. CNN was the first major network to report on the story, with correspondent Jessica Martinez filing a report from Anchorage that aired on the evening news of June 3rd. A father-son fishing trip to one of Alaska's most remote wilderness areas ended in tragedy yesterday when a massive brown bear attacked their group, killing 2 and leaving a 14-year-old boy as the sole survivor, Martinez reported. The story gained additional traction when dramatic photographs of the damaged truck and the massive dead bear were released by Alaska state troopers. The images, showing the extent of the vehicle's damage and the enormous size of the bear, provided visual evidence of the attack's violence that shocked viewers across the country. Social media amplified the story's reach, with the hashtag #KodiakAttack trending on Twitter as users shared the photos and debated bear safety, wilderness management, and gun rights. The incident became a flashpoint for various political and cultural debates, with different groups using the tragedy to advance their preferred narratives about outdoor recreation, wildlife management, and self-defense. Gun rights advocates pointed to Daniel's use of his rifle to defend his family as evidence of the importance of Second Amendment rights, while gun control supporters noted that even a high-powered rifle had failed to prevent the tragedy. Wildlife conservation groups emphasized the rarity of such attacks and warned against overreaction that might lead to wholesale bear killings, while hunting organizations called for more aggressive management of dangerous predators. The National Rifle Association issued a statement praising Daniel's heroic defense of his son and noting that his accurate shooting had ultimately killed the bear and prevented additional casualties. This tragic incident demonstrates why law-abiding citizens must have access to the firearms necessary to defend themselves and their families in dangerous situations, the NRA statement read. Conversely, the Sierra Club issued its own statement emphasizing that bear attacks remain extremely rare and that increased human activity in bear habitat inevitably leads to more conflicts. While this tragedy is heartbreaking, we must remember that we are the visitors in the bear's home, the Sierra Club statement noted. The solution is not to kill more bears, but to educate people about coexisting safely with wildlife. The media attention created additional stress for Patricia and Ethan Reeves, who were already struggling to cope with their loss and trauma. Hospital administrators at Providence, Alaska Medical Center were forced to post security guards to prevent reporters and photographers from attempting to interview the traumatized teenager. Patricia released a brief statement through a family spokesman asking for privacy during their time of grief. "We are devastated by the loss of Daniel and Marcus, and we ask that the media respect our need for privacy as we begin the long process of healing. Ethan witnessed things that no child should ever see, and our focus right now is on helping him recover from this trauma. But the media pressure was intense, with reporters offering substantial sums for exclusive interviews with Ethan or access to additional photographs from the attack scene. Patricia was forced to hire an attorney to handle media requests and to protect her son's privacy rights. The first lawsuit related to the bear attack was filed just 4 days after the incident, when Patricia Reeves sued the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for wrongful death, claiming that the agency's failure to remove Ki-47, despite its known aggressive behavior, constituted negligence. The lawsuit, filed in Anchorage Superior Court, sought unspecified damages for Daniel's death and Ethan's psychological trauma. The state of Alaska knew this bear was dangerous, Attorney Michael Harrison argued in the lawsuit. They had documented its aggressive behavior. They had received multiple complaints about property damage and threatening encounters, and they had made the decision to remove this animal from the population. Their failure to act in a timely manner directly led to my client's death. The state immediately denied liability, arguing that visitors to wilderness areas assume inherent risks and that the Department of Fish and Game cannot be held responsible for the behavior of wild animals. Mr. Reeves chose to enter prime bear habitat during peak activity season, State Attorney General spokesperson Linda Chen argued. While this tragedy is deeply unfortunate, the state cannot guarantee the safety of every person who chooses to recreate in Alaska's wilderness areas. A separate lawsuit was filed by Marcus Thompson's widow, claiming that Daniel Reeves had been negligent in choosing to remain at Bear Creek despite obvious signs of bear activity. The lawsuit argued that a reasonably prudent person would have left the area immediately upon discovering fresh bear tracks, and that Daniel's decision to continue fishing had directly led to the guide's death. Marcus Thompson was an experienced professional who recommended leaving the area, Attorney Robert Martinez argued. Mr. Reeves overruled that professional judgment and insisted on staying to fish. That decision cost Marcus his life. Patricia Reeves's attorney immediately filed a counterclaim, arguing that Marcus Thompson had accepted the risks inherent in his profession and that Daniel had relied on the guide's expertise in making decisions about safety. The legal battle over liability would continue for months, adding additional stress to an already tragic situation. The psychological treatment of Ethan Reeves became the subject of intense medical attention as psychiatrists worked to help the traumatized teenager process his experience and begin healing from the trauma. Dr. Amanda Foster, a specialist in childhood trauma and PTSD, was brought in to oversee Ethan's treatment at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. Ethan is dealing with multiple layers of trauma, Dr. Foster explained to Patricia. He witnessed extreme violence. He lost his father in a terrifying way. He believes he abandoned his father to save himself, and he survived an experience that most people would not survive. Each of these elements requires specific therapeutic intervention. The initial treatment focused on stabilizing Ethan's immediate psychological condition and helping him distinguish between reality and the distorted perceptions that trauma can create. Ethan was experiencing nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and what psychiatrists call survivor's guilt, the belief that he should have died instead of his father. "I should have stayed with Dad," Ethan repeated during his sessions with Dr. Foster. "I should have helped him fight the bear. Instead, I ran away like a coward." Dr. Foster worked patiently to help Ethan understand that his survival did not make him a coward, and that his father's final act had been to save his son's life. "Your father shot that bear to protect you," she explained. "If you had stayed, you both would have died. By surviving, you honored his sacrifice. But changing the thought patterns created by trauma takes time, and Ethan's recovery would be measured in months and years rather than days or weeks. The intensity of what he had witnessed, combined with the loss of his father, created psychological wounds that would require long-term treatment and support." Patricia arranged to take an extended leave from her job as a marketing director in Seattle to focus on Ethan's recovery. The family's health insurance would cover most of the medical expenses, but the cost of extended psychological treatment, combined with the loss of Daniel's income and the legal expenses related to the various lawsuits, created significant financial pressure. "I don't care about the money," Patricia told her sister during a phone conversation. "I just want my son to be okay." "But I'm looking at years of treatment, possibly decades. How do I even begin to plan for that?" The financial impact of the tragedy extended beyond medical expenses. Daniel had been the primary breadwinner for his family, earning over $120,000 per year as a petroleum engineer. His life insurance policy would provide some financial security, but Patricia realized that she would need to completely restructure her life to accommodate Ethan's needs while maintaining some source of income. The decision to relocate from Seattle to Anchorage was difficult but necessary. Patricia felt that being closer to the site of the trauma might help Ethan process his experience, and the medical resources available in Alaska were specifically tailored to treating trauma related to wilderness incidents. Alaska's mental health system had extensive experience with PTSD cases related to bear attacks, plane crashes, and other wilderness emergencies. The move took place in early August, nearly 2 months after the attack. Patricia sold their home in Seattle and used the proceeds to purchase a smaller house in Anchorage, close enough to Providence, Alaska Medical Center to facilitate Ethan's ongoing treatment. The physical relocation was challenging, but the emotional impact of leaving behind their old life was even more difficult. "Everything reminds me of Dad," Ethan told Dr. Foster during one of their sessions. "Our house in Seattle, the places we used to go, even the smell of camping gear. Moving to Alaska doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because now I'm in the same state where he died." Dr. Foster helped Ethan understand that avoiding reminders of trauma was not the same as healing from trauma. "Your father's death was tragic, but his life was meaningful," she explained. "Part of healing is learning to remember the good parts of your relationship without being overwhelmed by the way it ended. The process of healing was complicated by the ongoing media attention and legal proceedings related to the attack. Every few weeks, a new story would appear in the news about bear management policies, wilderness safety, or the legal battles surrounding the incident. Each story forced Ethan to relive aspects of the trauma, slowing his progress and reinforcing his psychological wounds. Patricia became increasingly protective of her son's privacy, screening phone calls, monitoring his internet access, and carefully controlling his exposure to media coverage of the incident. But completely shielding him from reminders of the attack proved impossible in a state where bear encounters were a regular part of life. The one-year anniversary of the attack approached with particular dread for both Patricia and Ethan. Dr. Foster had warned them that anniversary dates often trigger renewed symptoms in trauma victims, and she recommended that they plan specific activities to help Ethan cope with the emotional impact of the date. "I want to go back," Ethan told his mother in late May 2026. "I want to see where Dad died." Patricia's initial reaction was horror at the thought of returning to the site of such trauma. But Dr. Foster suggested that a carefully planned visit, with appropriate psychological support, might actually help Ethan achieve closure and move forward in his healing process. Many trauma victims find it helpful to revisit the site of their trauma in a controlled, safe environment, Dr. Foster explained. It can help them integrate their experience and reduce the power that the traumatic memories hold over them. The return trip to Kodiak Island was planned meticulously, with Dr. Foster accompanying them and emergency psychological support available if needed. They flew to Kodiak City on May 28, 2026, staying at a hotel rather than camping to minimize triggers that might cause psychological distress. The visit to Karluk Lake was brief but emotionally powerful. Standing at the site where his father had died, Ethan was able to speak directly to Daniel's memory, expressing his love, his gratitude, and his ongoing guilt about surviving when his father had not. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Dad," Ethan said, his voice barely audible above the wind through the trees. "But I promise I'll try to make my life worth the sacrifice you made." Patricia watched her son with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. The 17-year-old young man standing before her bore little resemblance to the carefree boy who had embarked on a fishing trip 3 years earlier. The trauma had aged him far beyond his years, giving him a gravity and seriousness that most teenagers never develop, but there were also signs of healing. Ethan was sleeping better, having fewer nightmares, and beginning to talk about his future in ways that suggested hope rather than just survival. He had expressed interest in studying wildlife biology in college, saying that he wanted to understand bear behavior and help prevent similar tragedies. "Maybe if I can help other people stay safe around bears, Dad's death will have meant something," Ethan had told Dr. Foster during one of their sessions. "Maybe I can turn this horrible thing into something that helps people." The return trip to Kodiak also provided an opportunity to visit Marcus Thompson's grave and to meet with his widow Sarah Thompson. The meeting was emotional for all involved, but it helped both families achieve a sense of closure and mutual understanding. "Marcus died doing what he loved," Sarah told Ethan and Patricia. "He knew the risks of his job, and he chose to accept them because he believed in helping people experience Alaska's wilderness safely. What happened to your family was a tragedy, but it wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes the wilderness wins, despite all our preparations and precautions." Sarah Thompson had struggled with her own grief and anger in the months following her husband's death. The financial impact had been severe. Marcus's guide service had been their primary source of income, and his death had left her with substantial debts and no clear way to support herself and their 2 young children. The lawsuit she had filed against Daniel Reeves's estate had been settled out of court, providing some financial relief, but doing little to ease the emotional pain of her loss. "I was angry for a long time," Sarah admitted during their conversation. Angry at Daniel for insisting they stay at the creek, angry at Marcus for getting out of that truck, angry at the whole situation. But anger doesn't bring him back, and it doesn't help my kids remember their father the way he really was. The meeting between the two families helped both sides move toward forgiveness and understanding. Patricia was able to express her gratitude for Marcus's sacrifice, while Sarah was able to see the human cost of the tragedy beyond her own loss. For Ethan, meeting Marcus's children, ages 8 and 10, provided perspective on how trauma affects entire families, not just direct victims. "Their dad died saving my life," Ethan told Dr. Foster after the meeting. "That's a responsibility I'll carry forever. I need to make sure my life is worth his sacrifice." The conversation with Sarah Thompson also provided new details about the attack that helped investigators better understand the sequence of events. Sarah had spoken extensively with Marcus about bear behavior and safety protocols, and she was able to provide insights into her husband's decision-making process during the critical moments of the encounter. Marcus always said that the most dangerous moment in any bear encounter is when you have to choose between fight and flight, Sarah explained. He taught his clients that if a bear is focused on you specifically, running is usually the worst option because it triggers the bear's chase instinct. But if the bear is distracted or focused on something else, that might be your only chance to escape. According to Sarah, Marcus had made a calculated decision to draw the bear's attention away from Daniel and Ethan, knowing that it would likely cost him his life, but believing it was their only chance for survival. The decision was consistent with his professional training and his personal ethics, but it also reflected the impossible choices that wilderness guides sometimes face. He used to say that his job wasn't just to show people fish or wildlife, Sarah continued. His job was to bring them home safely, even if it meant he didn't come home himself. The investigation into the bear attack had continued throughout the intervening years, with wildlife biologists studying the factors that had contributed to KY-47's aggressive behavior. Dr. Sarah Chen's analysis of the bear's tissues and stomach contents had revealed no evidence of disease or abnormal conditions that might have triggered unusual aggression. This was simply a large, dominant male bear defending territory that he considered his own, Dr. Chen concluded in her final report. The combination of his size, age, previous experience with humans, and the specific circumstances of the encounter created a perfect storm for conflict. The necropsy had revealed that KY-47 was approximately 14 years old, near the upper end of the typical lifespan for wild brown bears. The animal showed signs of previous injuries from territorial disputes with other bears, including partially healed claw marks and one broken rib that had healed improperly. These old injuries may have contributed to the bear's increasingly aggressive behavior, as pain and reduced mobility could make an animal more likely to view humans as threats. Dr. Chen's team also conducted a detailed analysis of the attack site, mapping the movements of both the bear and the humans throughout the encounter. The evidence showed that KY-47 had been following the family's scent trail for over a mile before the final confrontation, demonstrating the deliberate and purposeful nature of the bear's behavior. This wasn't a case of humans accidentally surprising a bear or interrupting its feeding, Dr. Chen explained. This bear made a conscious decision to investigate and ultimately confront the humans in his territory. The attack was defensive in nature, but it was also premeditated to the extent that bears are capable of premeditation. The findings supported the conclusion that no amount of bear safety training or defensive measures could have completely prevented the encounter, given KY-47's size, determination, and territorial instincts. Even Daniel's perfect shot placement and appropriate choice of ammunition had been insufficient to stop the bear before it inflicted fatal injuries. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game used the incident to revise its protocols for dealing with problem bears, implementing new policies that required more aggressive intervention when bears showed repeated aggressive behavior toward humans. Under the new guidelines, Ki-47 would have been captured or killed months before the fatal encounter. We learned from this tragedy that we can't afford to wait for the perfect opportunity to deal with dangerous bears, explained Fish and Game Director Robert Stevens. The risk to human life is too great, and the consequences of inaction are too severe. The policy changes included increased funding for bear monitoring and control programs, mandatory reporting of all bear encounters by guides and outfitters, and expedited procedures for removing bears that showed aggressive behavior. Wildlife managers hoped that these measures would prevent similar tragedies in the future, though they acknowledged that eliminating all risk from bear encounters was impossible. The legal proceedings related to the attack continued for over 2 years, with multiple lawsuits and countersuits creating a complex web of liability claims. Patricia Reeves's wrongful death lawsuit against the state of Alaska was ultimately settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, though sources familiar with the negotiations suggested the settlement was substantial. The lawsuit filed by Marcus Thompson's widow against Daniel Reeves's estate was also settled, with both sides agreeing to a division of liability that acknowledged the shared risks and responsibilities involved in wilderness guiding. The settlement provided financial support for the Thompson children's education while avoiding a lengthy trial that would have been emotionally devastating for both families. Perhaps more importantly, the legal proceedings resulted in new regulations governing wilderness guide services in Alaska. The new rules required guides to carry additional insurance, to complete enhanced bear safety training, and to provide more detailed safety briefings to their clients. While these measures could not guarantee safety, they represented a significant improvement in industry standards. The insurance industry also responded to the incident by developing new policies specifically designed for wilderness recreation. The massive damage to Daniel's truck ultimately totaled at $76,847, led to enhanced coverage options for vehicles used in remote areas where wildlife encounters were possible. This incident showed us that traditional auto insurance policies weren't adequate for Alaska's unique risks, explained insurance industry analyst Jennifer Martinez. We've had to develop entirely new actuarial models to account for the possibility of bear attacks on vehicles. The media coverage of the bear attack had lasting impacts beyond the immediate aftermath of the incident. The dramatic photographs and video footage from the scene became iconic images of human-wildlife conflict, appearing in documentaries, news programs, and educational materials about wilderness safety. National Geographic produced an hour-long documentary about the incident titled Kodiak: When Giants Attack, which aired in March 2027. The program featured interviews with survivors, investigators, and wildlife experts, providing a comprehensive analysis of the factors that led to the tragedy. This attack represents the collision of two worlds, narrator Peter Coyote explained in the documentary's opening. The world of modern humans seeking adventure and connection with nature, and the ancient world of apex predators defending territory that has been theirs for millennia. The documentary was praised for its balanced approach to the incident, avoiding sensationalism while honestly depicting the violence and tragedy of the encounter. For Patricia and Ethan, participating in the documentary was part of their healing process, allowing them to share their story in a way that might help prevent similar tragedies. If our story can help one family make better decisions about wilderness safety, then maybe Dad's death will have served a purpose, Ethan said during his interview for the documentary. I don't want other kids to go through what I went through. The documentary also featured extensive footage of Kodiak Island's bear population, helping viewers understand the magnificence and power of these animals. Dr. Chen and other wildlife biologists used the program to educate the public about bear behavior, habitat needs, and the challenges of managing human-wildlife conflicts. Bears like Ki-47 are not monsters, Dr. Chen explained in the documentary. They're apex predators, doing what evolution designed them to do, defending territory and resources necessary for survival. The tragedy is that our two species are increasingly coming into conflict as human activity expands into traditional bear habitat. The educational impact of the documentary was significant, with many wilderness recreation groups adopting new safety protocols based on the lessons learned from the Kodiak attack. Bear spray sales increased dramatically in Alaska following the program's broadcast, and enrollment in wilderness safety courses reached record levels. The incident also sparked academic research into human-bear conflicts, with several universities launching studies to better understand the factors that lead to aggressive encounters. The University of Alaska Fairbanks established the Daniel Reeves Memorial Research Fund to support studies of bear behavior and wilderness safety, funded by donations from the outdoor recreation community. Dr. Mark Johnson, a wildlife behaviorist at UAF, used GPS collars and camera traps to study bear behavior in the Karluk Lake area following the attack. His research revealed that Ki-47's territory had been taken over by a younger male who showed no signs of the aggressive behavior toward humans that had characterized his predecessor. The removal of Ki-47, tragic as the circumstances were, actually restored a more natural balance to the bear population in this area, Dr. Johnson explained. The new dominant male is focused on traditional bear activities, fishing, foraging, and mating, rather than territorial disputes with humans. The research also provided new insights into the factors that can make individual bears dangerous to humans. Dr. Johnson's team identified several characteristics that appeared to correlate with aggressive behavior, including advanced age, previous injuries, unusual territorial behavior, and lack of fear toward humans. Not all large bears are dangerous to humans, Dr. Johnson noted, but when you combine exceptional size with certain behavioral characteristics, you get an animal that poses significant risk to human safety. The challenge is identifying these animals before tragedy occurs. As Ethan approached his 18th birthday in the fall of 2027, he began making plans for college and his future career. His experiences on Kodiak Island had shaped his academic interests, leading him toward wildlife biology and conservation. He had been accepted to several universities with strong wildlife programs, ultimately choosing the University of Alaska Fairbanks to study under Dr. Chen and other researchers who had investigated his father's death. "I want to understand bears the way they understood Dad," Ethan explained to his mother as they discussed his college plans. "I want to know why Ki-47 did what he did and how we can prevent it from happening again." Patricia supported her son's career choice, though she worried about the psychological impact of choosing a profession that would keep him in close contact with the circumstances of his trauma. Dr. Foster had assured her that many trauma survivors find healing through work related to their experience, but the concern remained. "He's been through something that would destroy most people," Patricia confided to her sister. "But instead of being destroyed by it, he's been shaped by it. I just hope he's strong enough to handle what he's chosen to do." Ethan's first semester at UAF was challenging but rewarding. His professors were aware of his background and provided additional support as he navigated coursework that often dealt directly with predator behavior and human-wildlife conflicts. Dr. Chen became a mentor, helping Ethan channel his personal experience into academic understanding. Your experience gives you insights that most students will never have, Dr. Chen told Ethan during one of their meetings. But you need to be careful not to let that experience cloud your scientific objectivity. Bears are not monsters, even the one that killed your father. The balance between personal experience and scientific objectivity would be an ongoing challenge for Ethan throughout his academic career. His first research project involved analyzing human-bear conflicts across Alaska, work that required him to study dozens of cases similar to his own experience. Reading the incident reports was emotionally difficult, but it also provided perspective on the rarity of fatal encounters and the specific circumstances that tend to lead to tragedy. Most bear encounters ended without injury to either humans or bears, and even aggressive encounters rarely resulted in fatalities. For every story like ours, there are thousands of encounters that end peacefully, Ethan wrote in his first research paper. Understanding why some encounters turn tragic while others don't is the key to preventing future tragedies. His research identified several factors that appeared to correlate with fatal bear attacks: the presence of cubs or food sources, territorial behavior by large males, surprise encounters at close range, and situations where bears felt trapped or threatened. The Kodiak attack had involved several of these factors, making it a nearly worst-case scenario for human-bear conflict. The academic work helped Ethan process his trauma in new ways, transforming his personal experience into scientific knowledge that could benefit others. Dr. Foster noted significant improvement in his psychological condition as he became more engaged with his studies. He's found a way to make meaning from his trauma, Dr. Foster observed. That's one of the most important steps in recovery from PTSD, finding purpose in the experience rather than just surviving it. As Ethan progressed through his undergraduate studies, he began developing expertise in bear behavior and human-wildlife conflict management. His professors encouraged him to consider graduate school and eventual work with wildlife management agencies, where his unique background could contribute to policy development and public education. The 10-year anniversary of the attack in 2035 found Ethan completing his master's degree in wildlife biology at UAF. His thesis research focused on developing improved protocols for identifying and managing dangerous bears before they became involved in fatal encounters. The work was directly inspired by his father's death and Marcus Thompson's sacrifice. "We can't prevent all bear attacks," Ethan concluded in his thesis defense, "but we can identify high-risk situations and animals before tragedy occurs. The technology and knowledge exist. We just need the will and resources to implement them effectively." Patricia, now in her 50s, had rebuilt her life in Anchorage and found peace with the tragedy that had reshaped her family. She had remarried a kind man named Robert, who worked as a pilot for Alaska Airlines and understood the unique challenges of life in Alaska. Robert had never tried to replace Daniel in Ethan's life, but had provided stability and support during the most difficult years of recovery. "I never thought I'd be able to love someone again after Daniel," Patricia reflected during Ethan's graduation ceremony. "But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to honor the past while building a future." The graduation ceremony was held outdoors on the UAF campus, with the Alaska Range visible in the distance. As Ethan walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Patricia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror and grief of that June morning on Kodiak Island, to the hope and purpose that now characterized her son's life. Ethan's future plans included working for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the same agency that his mother had once sued over his father's death. The irony was not lost on either of them, but it represented a form of full-circle healing that brought meaning to their loss. "I want to work from the inside to prevent what happened to our family from happening to others," Ethan explained to reporters who had gathered to cover his graduation. Maybe I can't bring my father back, but I can try to protect other fathers and sons who want to experience Alaska's wilderness. Dr. Chen, who had served as Ethan's thesis advisor, praised his work and his potential contribution to wildlife management. Ethan brings a unique perspective to bear conservation, she noted. He understands both the human cost of bear attacks and the ecological importance of preserving these magnificent animals. That balance is exactly what we need in wildlife management. The media attention surrounding Ethan's graduation was more positive than the coverage that had followed the original attack. Instead of focusing on the violence and tragedy of the encounter, reporters emphasized the themes of resilience, healing, and the transformation of trauma into purpose. Teen bear attack survivor becomes wildlife expert, read the headline in the Anchorage Daily News, with a story that traced Ethan's journey from traumatized victim to educated advocate for both human safety and bear conservation. The article included updated information about bear management on Kodiak Island, noting that no fatal attacks had occurred in the area since the 2025 incident. Improved monitoring and more aggressive intervention with problem bears had reduced human-bear conflicts throughout the region, though officials cautioned that the risk could never be completely eliminated. "We've learned a lot from the tragedy that affected the Reeves family," said current Fish and Game Director Lisa Rodriguez. "Our management practices are much more proactive now, and we have better tools for identifying and addressing potentially dangerous situations before they escalate." The success of the improved management protocols was demonstrated by several non-fatal encounters in which potentially dangerous bears were identified and relocated before serious conflicts could develop. The early intervention approach had prevented an estimated 12 serious encounters over the previous 5 years, according to agency statistics. However, the cost of the enhanced monitoring and intervention programs was substantial, requiring increased funding from both state and federal sources. Some critics argued that the expense was not justified by the relatively small number of bear attacks, but supporters pointed to the Reeves family tragedy as evidence that even rare events could have devastating consequences. "You can't put a price on human life," argued State Representative Jennifer Martinez, who had championed increased funding for bear management programs. "If we can prevent one family from experiencing what the Reeves family went through, the investment is worthwhile." The economic impact of the bear attack extended beyond the direct costs of enhanced wildlife management. Tourism to Kodiak Island had initially declined following the incident, as potential visitors were deterred by the dramatic media coverage of the attack. The island's economy, heavily dependent on fishing and tourism, had suffered measurable losses in the years immediately following 2025. But over time, the improved safety protocols and enhanced guide training had actually increased confidence in Kodiak as a destination for wildlife viewing and fishing. The island now marketed itself as having the most comprehensive bear safety programs in Alaska, attracting visitors who wanted to experience brown bears in their natural habitat with minimal risk. "The tragedy forced us to take a hard look at our safety practices," explained Kodiak Tourism Director Michael Stevens. "The improvements we made as a result have actually made us a safer and more attractive destination than we were before." The enhanced safety measures included mandatory bear safety briefings for all visitors, improved communication systems for guides and outfitters, and the establishment of emergency response protocols that could rapidly deploy medical and evacuation resources in case of incidents. Guide services throughout Alaska had also improved their practices based on lessons learned from the Kodiak attack, Marcus Thompson's sacrifice had become a case study in guide training programs, with his decision to draw the bear away from his clients cited as both heroic and professionally appropriate. Marcus Thompson set the gold standard for guide behavior in emergency situations, explained Alaska Professional Hunters Association President David Clark. His actions saved lives, and every guide in Alaska knows that story and understands what it means to put client safety ahead of personal safety. The Thompson family had established a memorial scholarship fund to support training for wilderness guides, ensuring that Marcus's legacy would continue to influence safety practices throughout the industry. The scholarship program had trained over 200 guides in enhanced safety protocols, with many recipients going on to become leaders in their field. Sarah Thompson had eventually remarried and moved to Fairbanks, where she worked as a coordinator for the Wilderness Guide Training Program. Her children, now teenagers, had chosen to honor their father's memory by pursuing careers in outdoor recreation and safety education. Dad always said that the wilderness was meant to be shared safely, his daughter Emily explained during a speech at the annual Guide Safety Conference. We want to make sure that other families can experience Alaska's beauty without the risks that took our father away from us. The conference, held annually in Anchorage, had become the premier venue for sharing best practices in wilderness safety and bear encounter management. Ethan Reeves was invited to speak at the 2035 conference, representing the transition from victim to expert that had characterized his recovery journey. 15 years ago, I was a terrified kid who watched his father die defending him from a massive bear, Ethan told the audience of guides, outfitters, and wildlife managers. Today, I'm a wildlife biologist, working to prevent similar tragedies. That transformation is possible because of the work that all of you do to keep people safe in Alaska's wilderness. His presentation focused on the behavioral indicators that can help identify potentially dangerous bears before conflicts develop. Using data from GPS collars and camera traps, Ethan had developed a predictive model that could assess the risk level of individual bears based on their movement patterns, territorial behavior, and interactions with humans. We can't predict every bear attack, Ethan explained. But we can identify the bears most likely to become involved in conflicts with humans. Early intervention with these animals can prevent tragedies like the one that killed my father. The predictive model had been tested in several Alaska locations and had successfully identified high-risk bears in 73% of cases where conflicts eventually developed. While not perfect, the accuracy rate was high enough to justify operational use by wildlife management agencies. Dr. Chen, who had collaborated with Ethan on developing the model, noted its potential for application beyond Alaska. Human-bear conflicts are increasing throughout North America as development encroaches on bear habitat, she explained. Tools like Ethan's model could help wildlife managers from Montana to Maine make better decisions about when and how to intervene. The presentation was well received by conference attendees, many of whom had been working in Alaska during the time of the original attack. For veteran guides and wildlife managers, seeing Ethan's transformation from victim to expert represented a powerful example of resilience and purpose. I remember when that kid was helicoptered out of Kodiak, scared and traumatized, recalled guide Tom Rodriguez, who had worked in the Karluk Lake area for over 20 years. To see him here today, contributing to our understanding of bear safety, is incredibly inspiring. The conference also provided an opportunity for Ethan to meet other survivors of bear attacks, including several who had lost family members in similar encounters. The informal support network that developed among survivors had become an important resource for processing trauma and finding meaning in loss. There's something powerful about talking to someone who has been through what you've been through, explained Janet Morrison, who had lost her husband in a bear attack in Glacier Bay National Park in 2031. Ethan understands things that therapists and counselors, no matter how well trained, can't fully grasp. The Survivor Network had also become a voice for improved wilderness safety policies, with members testifying before legislative committees and working with agencies to develop better protocols for preventing and responding to bear attacks. Their advocacy had contributed to the passage of the Alaska Wilderness Safety Enhancement Act in 2034, which provided increased funding for bear research and management, enhanced training requirements for guides, and improved emergency response capabilities in remote areas. "We can't bring back our loved ones," Ethan testified during hearings on the legislation. "But we can work to ensure that other families don't have to experience the loss and trauma that we've endured." The legislation was signed into law by Governor Patricia Williams, who noted that the state had a responsibility to balance wilderness access with public safety. "Alaska's wilderness is one of our greatest treasures," Governor Williams said during the signing ceremony, "but that treasure comes with responsibilities to respect the power of nature, to prepare properly for its challenges, and to learn from tragedies when they occur." As Ethan began his career with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in 2036, he carried with him not only scientific training and professional expertise, but also the personal understanding of what was at stake in human-wildlife conflicts. His first assignment was to the Kodiak Island Bear Management Program, bringing him full circle to the place where his life had been forever changed. The irony of working to protect the same species that had killed his father was not lost on Ethan, but he had made peace with that apparent contradiction through years of study and reflection. "Bears aren't evil," he explained to new colleagues during his first week on the job. Ki-47 wasn't a monster. He was an apex predator doing what evolution designed him to do. The tragedy isn't that bears exist, it's that we sometimes put ourselves and them in situations where conflict is inevitable. His work involved monitoring bear populations, investigating human-bear conflicts, and making recommendations about when intervention was necessary to protect both human safety and bear welfare. The predictive model he had developed during graduate school became an operational tool, helping the department make more informed decisions about bear management. Within his first year on the job, Ethan was involved in relocating 3 bears that the model had identified as high risk for human conflicts. In each case, the bears were successfully moved to more remote areas where they could live natural lives without threatening human safety. "It's impossible to know for certain, but we may have prevented multiple tragedies," explained Ethan's supervisor, Dr. Richard Anderson. "That's exactly the kind of proactive approach we need to reduce human-wildlife conflicts." The work was emotionally challenging for Ethan, as each bear encounter reminded him of his father's death and Marcus Thompson's sacrifice. But Dr. Foster, who continued to provide psychological support as needed, helped him understand that confronting these challenges was part of his ongoing healing process. "You're not just doing a job," Dr. Foster observed. "You're actively working to prevent other families from experiencing what yours did. That gives meaning to your trauma and honors your father's memory." The 20th anniversary of the attack in 2045 found Ethan established as one of Alaska's leading experts on human-bear conflicts. He had published dozens of scientific papers, advised wildlife management agencies across North America, and helped develop international protocols for managing dangerous wildlife. More importantly, his work had contributed to a significant reduction in fatal bear attacks throughout Alaska. The proactive management approach pioneered on Kodiak Island had been adopted statewide, and the combination of improved monitoring, early intervention, and enhanced safety education had prevented an estimated 30 serious conflicts over the previous decade. "The numbers speak for themselves," noted Dr. Chen, now nearing retirement. "We've dramatically reduced human-bear conflicts while maintaining healthy bear populations. That's exactly what we hoped to achieve when we started this work." Patricia, now in her 60s and a grandmother to Ethan's 2 young children, reflected on the long journey from tragedy to healing that had characterized their family's experience. "I used to think that bear attack was the worst thing that could ever happen to us," she mused during a family gathering. "And in many ways, it was. But it also showed us how strong we could be, how much love could overcome, and how even terrible losses can be transformed into something meaningful." Ethan's children, Daniel, named for his grandfather, and Sarah, named for Dr. Chen, were growing up with an understanding of both the beauty and danger of Alaska's wilderness. At ages 6 and 4, they were too young to fully understand their family's history, but they were already learning the respect for wildlife that had been purchased at such a terrible price. "They'll grow up knowing that nature is powerful and can be dangerous," Ethan explained. "But they'll also know that we can coexist safely if we're smart, prepared, and respectful." The family made annual trips to Kodiak Island, not to relive the trauma, but to remember Daniel Reeves and Marcus Thompson in the place where they had made their final sacrifice. The trips were part memorial service, part family reunion, and part educational experience, as Ethan shared his knowledge of the island's wildlife with his children. At the site where Daniel had died, now marked by a small memorial cairn, Ethan would tell his children about their grandfather's courage and love. The story was age-appropriate but honest, helping them understand that their grandfather had died protecting the people he loved most. "Grandpa Daniel was brave," 6-year-old Daniel would always say after hearing the story. "When I grow up, I want to be brave like him." The memorial cairn had been built by Sarah Thompson and her children during a joint visit by both families in 2040. The simple pile of stones bore a small plaque reading, "In memory of Daniel Reeves and Marcus Thompson, who gave their lives protecting those they loved. Their courage lives on in the wilderness they cherished." The site had become an unofficial pilgrimage destination for other families affected by wildlife conflicts, with visitors leaving flowers, notes, and small tokens of remembrance. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game maintained the memorial and the surrounding area as an informal education site about wilderness safety. "This place represents both the tragic cost of human-wildlife conflicts and our determination to learn from that tragedy," Ethan explained to visitors during one of his trips to the site. "My father and Marcus Thompson died here, but their deaths weren't meaningless if they helped prevent future tragedies." The educational impact of the memorial site was enhanced by interpretive displays that explained bear behavior, safety protocols, and the importance of respecting wildlife. The displays were funded by donations from the outdoor recreation community and maintained by volunteers from local conservation organizations. Dr. Chen, who had studied the Karluk Lake bear population for over 30 years, noted that the area had remained an important habitat for brown bears despite the tragic events of 2025. "This is still one of the premier bear habitats in Alaska," she explained. "We've learned to manage human access better, but the bears continue to thrive here." That's exactly what Daniel Reeves and Marcus Thompson would have wanted, for people to be able to safely experience this incredible place. The current bear population in the Karluk Lake area was estimated at approximately 40 individuals, including several large males that rivaled KY-47 in size, but showed no signs of the aggressive territorial behavior that had made him so dangerous. "We monitor these bears constantly," Ethan explained during a research trip to the area. "We know their individual personalities, their territories, their behavior patterns. If any of them start showing concerning behavior toward humans, we intervene immediately." The monitoring program used GPS collars, camera traps, and regular aerial surveys to track bear movements and behavior. When combined with Ethan's predictive model, the system provided early warning of potential conflicts before they could escalate to dangerous levels. The success of the program had made Kodiak Island a model for bear management throughout North America. Wildlife managers from across the continent regularly visited to learn about the techniques and technologies that had been developed in response to the 2025 tragedy. "This is how we turn tragedy into progress," explained Dr. Anderson during a visit by Canadian wildlife officials. "We took the worst bear attack in Alaska's modern history and used it to build the most effective bear management program in the world." The international recognition of Kodiak's bear management program had also enhanced the island's reputation as a destination for wildlife viewing and photography. Visitors could now observe brown bears in their natural habitat with confidence that extensive safety measures were in place to protect both humans and bears. The economic impact was significant, with bear viewing tourism generating over $15 million annually for the island's economy. The revenue supported not only local businesses, but also the ongoing bear research and management programs that made safe wildlife viewing possible. "It's a positive feedback loop," explained Tourism Director Jennifer Rodriguez. "The better our bear management becomes, the more confident visitors feel about coming here. The more visitors we have, the more funding we can generate for bear research and safety programs." The success story of Kodiak's transformation from a site of tragedy to a model of human-wildlife coexistence represented one of the most positive outcomes of the 2025 bear attack. But for Ethan and Patricia, the most important measure of success was not economic or scientific. It was the prevention of similar tragedies for other families. Every time we relocate a potentially dangerous bear, every time a guide makes a smart safety decision, every time a family returns safely from a wilderness trip, we honor my father's memory, Ethan reflected during the 25th anniversary of the attack in 2050. By that time, Ethan had become the state's senior bear specialist, overseeing wildlife management programs throughout Alaska. His expertise was sought by agencies around the world, and his predictive model for identifying dangerous bears had been adopted in dozens of locations across North America and Europe. More importantly, his work had contributed to a dramatic reduction in fatal bear attacks throughout Alaska. In the 25 years since his father's death, only 3 fatal bear attacks had occurred in the state, a remarkable achievement given the increasing number of people visiting Alaska's wilderness areas. "The numbers tell the story," Ethan noted in a speech marking the anniversary. "We've proven that humans and bears can coexist safely if we're willing to invest in the knowledge, technology, and protocols necessary to prevent conflicts." The speech was delivered at the annual Alaska Wilderness Safety Conference, which had grown from a small gathering of guides and outfitters to an international symposium on human-wildlife conflict management. The conference drew attendees from around the world, all seeking to learn from Alaska's success in reducing dangerous wildlife encounters. Patricia, now in her 70s, attended the conference as a representative of families affected by wildlife conflicts. Her advocacy work over the previous decades had helped shape policies and funding priorities throughout Alaska, and she was recognized as a leading voice for balanced approaches to wildlife management. "I lost my husband to a bear attack 25 years ago," she told the conference audience. "But I've gained a son who has dedicated his life to preventing other families from experiencing that loss." That transformation from victim to advocate is possible for anyone who is willing to turn their pain into purpose. The conference also featured presentations by other family members affected by wildlife conflicts, including Sarah Thompson's daughter Emily, who had become a wilderness safety instructor, and Janet Morrison's son, who worked as a search and rescue coordinator. These families have turned their worst experiences into forces for positive change, observed conference organizer Dr. Martinez. Their advocacy and expertise have saved countless lives and prevented immeasurable suffering. The 25th anniversary also marked the completion of the Daniel Reeves Memorial Research Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The facility, funded by donations from the outdoor recreation community and state appropriations, provided a permanent home for research on human-wildlife conflicts and wilderness safety. The research center housed the world's largest collection of data on bear behavior and human-bear interactions, including detailed records from thousands of encounters across Alaska and other bear habitats. The facility also served as a training center for wildlife managers, guides, and law enforcement officers from around the world. This center represents the living legacy of Daniel Reeves's sacrifice, explained Dr. Chen during the dedication ceremony. Every researcher who trains here, every study that emerges from this facility, every life that is saved because of knowledge developed here honors his memory. Ethan served as the research center's first director, bringing together his personal experience, scientific expertise, and passion for preventing wildlife conflicts. Under his leadership, the center quickly became the global authority on bear behavior and safety protocols. The center's research had led to numerous breakthroughs in understanding bear psychology, developing non-lethal deterrents, and improving safety equipment. Innovations developed at the center had been adopted by wildlife agencies, outdoor recreation companies, and individual adventurers around the world. "We're not just studying bear attacks," Ethan explained to visiting researchers. "We're studying how to prevent them. Every piece of research we do is aimed at keeping families together and keeping both humans and bears safe." The center's work had also contributed to broader understanding of human-wildlife conflicts beyond bears. Research on predator behavior, habitat management, and conflict prevention had applications for managing wolves, mountain lions, crocodiles, and other dangerous wildlife around the world. As Ethan approached his 50th birthday in 2060, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from a traumatized teenager to an internationally recognized expert on wildlife safety. The path had been long and often difficult, marked by nightmares, grief, and the constant challenge of transforming personal trauma into professional purpose. But the work had also provided meaning and healing that went far beyond what any therapist or counselor could have offered. Every successful bear relocation, every family that returned safely from the wilderness, every young researcher trained at the Memorial Center represented a victory over the randomness and cruelty that had taken his father's life. "I can't bring my father back," Ethan told a reporter during an interview, marking his career achievements. "But I can work every day to ensure that other fathers and sons get to come home from their adventures together." That's the best memorial I can build for Daniel Reeves, a world where tragedies like ours become increasingly rare. Nigel. The interview was part of a documentary series about the long-term impacts of wildlife attacks, exploring how individuals and communities respond to and recover from traumatic encounters with dangerous animals. Ethan's story was featured as an example of resilience and the power of purpose in overcoming trauma. Ethan Reeves represents the best of human nature, the documentary narrator explained. Faced with unimaginable loss and trauma, he chose not to retreat from the wilderness that had claimed his father, but to understand it better so that others might be safer. The documentary also featured updates on bear populations throughout Alaska, showing how improved management practices had allowed both human recreation and bear conservation to thrive simultaneously. The state now supported over 100,000 brown bears, while maintaining one of the lowest rates of human-bear conflicts in the world. "We've proven that conservation and safety aren't opposing goals," explained current Fish and Game Director Lisa Rodriguez. "By managing bears more effectively, we've actually created more opportunities for people to safely experience these magnificent animals in their natural habitat." The success of Alaska's bear management program had become a model for other regions facing similar challenges. Officials from Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, and the American West regularly consulted with Ethan and his colleagues about adapting Alaska's methods to their local conditions. "The principles are universal," Ethan explained during a training session for international wildlife managers. "Understand the animals, monitor their behavior, intervene early when conflicts develop, and always prioritize prevention over reaction." The specific techniques may vary by region, but the fundamental approach works anywhere humans and bears share habitat. The training programs conducted by the Daniel Reeves Memorial Research Center had educated over 2,000 wildlife professionals from around the world, spreading Alaska's hard-won expertise to benefit communities and wildlife populations globally. As the 30-year anniversary of the attack approached in 2055, Ethan began planning his retirement from active fieldwork, though he intended to continue his research and education efforts at the Memorial Center. 3 decades of working with dangerous wildlife had taken a physical and emotional toll, but it had also provided a sense of completion and purpose that few people achieve in their careers. "I've done what I set out to do," Ethan reflected during a conversation with his mother. "We've made the wilderness safer for families. We've prevented countless tragedies, and we've built a system that will continue protecting people long after I'm gone." Patricia, now in her 80s but still mentally sharp and physically active, had become something of an elder stateswoman in the community of families affected by wildlife conflicts. Her advocacy work had influenced policy at state and federal levels, and her perspective as both a victim and a force for positive change was regularly sought by media and policymakers. "The bear attack was the worst day of our lives," she reflected, "but the 30 years that followed showed us what human beings are capable of when they refuse to be defined by tragedy. Ethan took the worst thing that ever happened to our family and turned it into the best thing he could do for other families." The milestone anniversary was marked by a special symposium bringing together researchers, wildlife managers, and affected families from around the world. The event, held at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, celebrated 3 decades of progress in human-wildlife conflict prevention, while acknowledging the ongoing challenges posed by increasing development in wildlife habitat. "We've come a long way since 2025, Ethan told the symposium audience, but climate change, habitat loss, and growing human populations mean that human-wildlife conflicts will continue to evolve. The work we've done provides a foundation, but each new generation of wildlife managers will face new challenges." The symposium also featured the announcement of the Ethan Reeves Fellowship Program, which would provide funding for young researchers to study human-wildlife conflicts at institutions around the world. The program, funded by donations from conservation organizations and outdoor recreation companies, would ensure that the next generation of wildlife managers would have the resources and training necessary to continue the work begun in response to the Kodiak tragedy. Ethan's story shows us that even the most devastating events can become catalysts for positive change, explained Dr. Martinez, who had succeeded Dr. Chen as director of the Bear Research Program. This fellowship program will ensure that his legacy continues to influence wildlife conservation and human safety for generations to come. The fellowship recipients would study at the Daniel Reeves Memorial Research Center and other leading institutions, conducting research on everything from bear psychology to conflict prevention technology. The program's goal was to maintain the momentum of progress in human-wildlife coexistence while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. As Ethan prepared for retirement, he could take satisfaction in knowing that the tragedy that had shaped his life had been transformed into a force for preventing similar tragedies for countless other families. The wilderness that had claimed his father's life had become safer for everyone who chose to experience its beauty and power. The bear that had attacked his family was long dead, but the species itself thrived under management practices that balanced conservation with human safety. Alaska's brown bear population was stable and healthy, while human-bear conflicts had reached historic lows, despite increasing recreational use of bear habitat. This is what success looks like, Ethan reflected during his final field season as an active wildlife manager. Not the elimination of all risk, that's impossible, but the intelligent management of risk so that both humans and bears can thrive in the same landscape. The Karluk Lake area where his father had died remained one of Alaska's premier bear habitats, now supporting over 50 brown bears, including several males that rivaled K147 in size. But unlike their predecessor, these bears had learned to coexist peacefully with the occasional human visitors who came to fish, photograph, or simply experience the majesty of Alaska's wilderness. The transformation of the area from a site of tragedy to a model of successful human-wildlife coexistence represented the ultimate victory over the randomness and violence that had claimed Daniel Reeves's life. Every family that safely enjoyed the area's natural beauty, every bear that lived unmolested in its natural habitat, every young person who learned about wildlife conservation honored the memory of both human and animal victims of that terrible June morning in 2025. "Dad would be proud," Ethan told his own children as they visited the memorial cairn during his final official trip to Kodiak Island. He died protecting the people he loved, and that sacrifice has grown into protection for thousands of people he never met. That's the kind of legacy that transforms tragedy into triumph. The children, now teenagers with their own interests and dreams, understood the significance of their grandfather's sacrifice and their father's response to it. They had grown up in the wilderness, learned to respect its power and beauty, and internalized the lessons that had been purchased at such a terrible price. "We'll always remember Grandpa Daniel," his grandson Daniel promised. "And we'll always work to keep families safe in the wilderness." As the family stood together at the memorial site, surrounded by the endless beauty of Alaska's wilderness, the circle of tragedy and healing seemed complete. The bear attack that had destroyed one family had ultimately strengthened countless others, creating a legacy of safety, knowledge, and respect for the natural world that would endure for generations to come. The story of the Kodiak bear attack had ended not with death and despair, but with life and hope. Proof that even the most devastating tragedies can be transformed by human courage, dedication, and love into forces for positive change in the world. The next stories. Bear Mauls, 3 police officers inside station. April 16th, 2025. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune in the Fairbanks North Star Borough Police Department as Officer Paul Hernandez pushed through the heavy glass doors at exactly 5:47 a.m. on April 16th, 2025. The morning air carried the sharp bite of an Alaskan spring, where temperatures still dipped below freezing despite the lengthening daylight hours. Paul's breath formed small clouds as he made his way across the parking lot, his duty belt creaking with each step, the familiar weight of his service weapon, radio, and other equipment, a comforting presence after 12 years on the force. At 43, Paul Hernandez had seen more than his share of unusual calls in Alaska's interior. Born and raised in Anchorage, he'd moved to Fairbanks 15 years earlier when his wife Maria landed a position as a nurse at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. They'd built a life together in this rugged community, raising their twin daughters, Elena and Sophia, now both juniors at West Valley High School. Paul had worked his way up from patrol officer to senior officer, earning respect for his calm demeanor under pressure and his ability to de-escalate volatile situations. His colleagues often joked that he could talk down a charging moose, a skill that had proven valuable in a state where wildlife encounters were part of daily life. The precinct building itself was a testament to practical Alaskan architecture, built in 1987 with reinforced concrete walls and small, energy-efficient windows designed to withstand the brutal winters. The structure housed the main police operations for the Fairbanks North Star Borough, serving a population of nearly 100,000 residents, spread across an area larger than many states. The building's layout was straightforward. A public lobby with bulletproof glass separating visitors from the front desk, administrative offices on the second floor, a holding area for suspects, and a large garage bay where patrol vehicles underwent maintenance, and officers could load equipment without exposure to the elements. Detective Lisa Monroe arrived at the station just 3 minutes after Paul, her unmarked Ford Explorer crunching over the remnants of winter sand still scattered across the parking lot. At 38, Lisa was the senior detective in the Criminal Investigation Division, a position she'd earned through 14 years of meticulous police work and an impressive case closure rate. Originally from Seattle, she'd moved to Alaska after completing her master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Washington, drawn by the unique challenges of law enforcement in the last frontier. Her expertise in violent crimes had made her indispensable to the department, particularly in cases involving domestic violence and assault. Lisa's personal life had been shaped by the demands of her career. Divorced 3 years earlier from her ex-husband Mark, a commercial fisherman whose work schedule conflicted with her own unpredictable hours, she now shared custody of their 10-year-old son, Tyler. The boy lived with her during the school year and spent summers with his father in Kodiak. Lisa had learned to compartmentalize the brutal realities of her work from her role as a mother, though the job's psychological toll was something she'd been grappling with more frequently as Tyler grew older and began asking more pointed questions about why she sometimes came home late or seemed distracted during dinner. The third member of what would later be called the garage incident was Detective Sean Briggs, who pulled into the parking lot at 5:52 a.m. in his personal vehicle, a lifted Chevy Silverado equipped with studded tires and a snowplow attachment. Sean, 34 years old, represented the newer generation of Alaskan law enforcement officers. College-educated, technologically savvy, and cross-trained in multiple specialties, he held certifications in digital forensics, crisis negotiation, and tactical operations, making him a valuable asset to a department that often operated with limited resources across vast distances. Sean's path to law enforcement had been unconventional. After earning a degree in computer science from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, he'd worked for several years in the private sector, developing security software for oil companies operating on the North Slope. However, the death of his younger sister in a drunk driving accident had redirected his life toward public service. He joined the Fairbanks police force at 28, bringing technical skills that proved invaluable in modern investigations, while learning traditional police work from veterans like Paul and Lisa. The morning of April 16th had begun unremarkably for all three officers. Paul had arrived early to complete paperwork from a domestic disturbance call the previous evening, a case that required careful documentation due to the potential for escalation. Lisa was preparing for a 7 a.m. meeting with the district attorney's office regarding testimony in an upcoming assault trial, reviewing her notes and ensuring all evidence was properly catalogued. Sean had been called in early to assist with a computer forensics request from the Alaska State Troopers, who needed help recovering deleted files from a suspect's laptop in a fraud investigation. The Fairbanks North Star Borough encompasses over 7,400 square miles of interior Alaska, a region characterized by dense forests, winding rivers, and an abundance of wildlife that regularly ventures into human settlements. The area is home to one of North America's largest populations of brown bears, also known as grizzly bears, which can weigh up to 800 pounds and stand over 9 feet tall on their hind legs. These formidable predators typically emerge from hibernation in April and May, hungry and aggressive after months without food, searching for easily accessible calories to replenish their depleted fat reserves. Spring of 2025 had been particularly challenging for the region's bear population. An unusually cold and extended winter had delayed the emergence of natural food sources, while a late thaw had left many salmon runs disrupted and berry patches still covered in snow. Wildlife biologists from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game had issued warnings about increased human-bear encounters, advising residents to secure garbage cans, remove bird feeders, and report any bear sightings immediately. The department had received over 40 bear-related calls in the first 2 weeks of April alone, a significant increase from previous years. Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist with 15 years of experience studying Alaska's bear populations, had been monitoring radio-collared bears throughout the Fairbanks area since early March. Her research focused on post-hibernation behavior patterns and how climate change was affecting traditional feeding schedules. On the morning of April 15th, just 24 hours before the incident at the police station, she had received troubling data from one of her tracking collars. Bear 247, a massive male grizzly weighing an estimated 750 pounds, had been moving in an erratic pattern through residential areas on the outskirts of Fairbanks, behavior that suggested either illness or extreme hunger-driven desperation. Bear 247 had been first tagged 3 years earlier after being relocated from Denali National Park following several aggressive encounters with campers. The bear, estimated to be 12 years old, had established a territory in the forested area northeast of Fairbanks, generally avoiding human contact while successfully hunting salmon during summer months and foraging for berries in preparation for hibernation. However, Dr. Chen's data showed that the bear had emerged from its den nearly 2 weeks earlier than normal, likely due to environmental disruptions caused by late-season snow that had collapsed portions of its winter shelter. The police station's location at 1910 Cushman Street placed it in what wildlife experts considered a natural corridor for animals moving between the Chena River and the forested areas to the north. The building's rear parking area backed up against a stand of birch and spruce trees, with a chain-link fence providing minimal barrier between the developed property and the wildlands beyond. Over the years, officers had occasionally spotted moose, lynx, and even black bears on the property, but these encounters had always been brief and without incident, with animals typically fleeing as soon as they detected human presence. Sergeant Mike Torres had arrived at the station at 5:30 a.m. to begin his shift as watch commander, responsible for coordinating patrol activities across the borough's sprawling jurisdiction. At 51, Mike was a 26-year veteran of the force who had seen the community grow from a small frontier town to a regional hub for Alaska's interior. His experience included serving as the department's unofficial wildlife liaison, having been involved in numerous bear encounters throughout his career. Mike's knowledge of animal behavior had made him the go-to officer for situations involving aggressive wildlife, and he had successfully used non-lethal deterrents to resolve dozens of bear encounters without harm to either humans or animals. Mike's morning routine included checking overnight reports, reviewing patrol assignments, and ensuring all vehicles were properly equipped for the day's operations. The garage bay, a critical component of the station's infrastructure, served multiple functions beyond vehicle maintenance. The space housed emergency equipment, evidence storage, and served as a staging area for tactical operations. Its overhead doors, designed to accommodate large emergency vehicles, were controlled by both manual switches and remote controls carried by senior staff members. Officer Jennifer Walsh, the department's community liaison and public information officer, had arrived at 5:45 a.m. to prepare press materials for a community safety meeting scheduled for later that morning. The meeting was part of an ongoing initiative to educate residents about bear safety, following the recent increase in wildlife encounters. Jennifer, 31 years old and a 7-year veteran of the force, had developed expertise in wildlife education after completing specialized training with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Her presentations combined practical safety tips with scientific information about bear behavior, helping residents understand how to coexist safely with their wild neighbors. The morning briefing was scheduled for 6:15 a.m., bringing together the day shift officers to review overnight incidents, discuss ongoing investigations, and coordinate patrol schedules. Paul Hernandez had finished his paperwork and was preparing to attend the briefing when he received a radio call about a reported prowler in the industrial district near the airport. The call, which would later prove tragically ironic, described someone or something moving through a commercial parking lot, possibly attempting to break into vehicles or buildings. Detective Lisa Monroe was reviewing case files in her cubicle when dispatch received the prowler call. Her experience with break-in investigations made her a logical choice to assist Paul with the call, and she gathered her equipment while monitoring radio traffic for additional details. The reported location was approximately 15 minutes away from the station, in an area known for occasional transient activity but generally considered low risk for serious criminal activity. Sean Briggs had been working at a computer terminal in the detective division when he overheard the radio traffic about the prowler call. Although his primary focus was the digital forensics request, he volunteered to provide backup if needed, particularly since the location was isolated and backup might be required, depending on what the responding officers encountered. His tactical training had taught him the importance of having adequate personnel for potentially unpredictable situations, even those that initially appeared routine. The decision to investigate the prowler call would prove to be a crucial factor in the morning's events. Had Paul, Lisa, and Sean departed for the call location as planned, they would not have been present at the station when Bear 247 began his approach through the wooded area behind the building. The bear's movement had been tracked by Dr. Chen's monitoring equipment, showing a steady progression toward the station throughout the early morning hours, but this information had not yet been processed or communicated to local authorities. At approximately 5:55 a.m., Bear 247 emerged from the tree line approximately 200 yards behind the police station. The massive grizzly moved with the deliberate gait characteristic of a hungry predator, pausing frequently to test the air for scents that might indicate food sources. His winter hibernation had depleted his body weight by nearly 30%, driving an overwhelming biological imperative to consume high-calorie foods to restore his energy reserves. The bear's acute sense of smell, estimated to be 7 times more sensitive than a bloodhound's, detected the complex mixture of scents emanating from the police station. Vehicle exhaust, cleaning chemicals, food remnants from the break room, and the distinctive odor of humans. The station's garbage receptacles, located near the rear entrance and scheduled for pickup later that morning, contained food waste from the previous day's activities. While the containers were supposedly bear-resistant, their lids had not been properly secured, allowing scent molecules to escape and create an olfactory trail that drew the hungry predator toward the building. This seemingly minor oversight in waste management protocols would have catastrophic consequences within the next hour. Bear 247's approach to the station was methodical and purposeful, exhibiting behavior patterns that Dr. Chen would later describe as consistent with a predator that had lost its natural fear of humans. The bear paused at the perimeter fence, a 6-foot chain-link barrier that presented no significant obstacle to an animal capable of climbing trees and traversing steep mountain terrain. After briefly investigating the fence line, the bear located a section where ground erosion had created a gap beneath the fencing, allowing him to push through onto the station property. Inside the building, the morning routine continued without awareness of the approaching danger. Paul Hernandez had moved to the garage area to check the equipment in his patrol vehicle, ensuring that his emergency medical kit, traffic cones, and report forms were properly stocked. The garage bay's overhead door remained closed against the morning chill, but the building's ventilation system continued to circulate air, carrying human scents outside where they could be detected by the bear's sensitive nose. Lisa Monroe had joined Paul in the garage to discuss the prowler call, reviewing the limited information available and planning their approach to the investigation. Their conversation focused on potential safety concerns, given the isolated location and the early hour when visibility might be compromised. Both officers were experienced enough to recognize that routine calls could quickly escalate into dangerous situations, requiring careful planning and clear communication protocols. Sean Briggs entered the garage area at 6:02 a.m., carrying his laptop computer and a portable equipment case containing digital forensics tools. He had decided to transport the seized laptop to the Alaska State Trooper facility for analysis, requiring him to load the sensitive electronic equipment into a secure vehicle. The garage provided a climate-controlled environment for handling delicate technical equipment, protecting it from temperature extremes and moisture that could compromise digital evidence. The garage space itself was approximately 40 feet wide by 60 feet deep, with concrete floors painted with industrial-grade epoxy for durability and easy cleaning. Fluorescent light fixtures provided adequate illumination for vehicle maintenance and equipment handling, while a sophisticated ventilation system removed exhaust fumes and chemical odors from the workspace. The overhead door system consisted of 2 parallel tracks with electric motors capable of lifting the heavy insulated doors that protected the interior from Alaska's harsh climate. Bear 247 had moved to within 50 yards of the station building, his massive form hidden behind a small maintenance shed that housed heating and electrical equipment. From this position, the bear could observe the human activity around the building while remaining concealed from casual observation. His behavior demonstrated the intelligence and adaptability that made grizzly bears such successful predators, capable of learning from experience and modifying their hunting strategies based on environmental conditions. The bear's physical condition, while depleted from hibernation, remained formidable. Standing approximately 9 feet tall on his hind legs, Bear 247 possessed the raw power to break through doors, shatter windows, and overpower multiple humans simultaneously. His claws, each measuring up to 4 inches in length, were designed for digging, climbing, and grasping prey, while his jaws could exert crushing force sufficient to crack the skull of a moose. Despite weighing less than his pre-hibernation maximum, The bear still carried over 500 pounds of muscle and bone, moving with surprising speed and agility for such a massive creature. Dr. Chen's research had documented numerous cases of bears learning to associate human buildings with food sources, a behavioral adaptation that often led to increasingly bold encounters. Bears that successfully obtained food from human sources typically returned to the same locations repeatedly, with each successful feeding experience reinforcing the behavior and reducing the animal's natural wariness of humans. Bear 247's tracking data suggested that he had been investigating human settlements for several days, possibly learning to associate certain buildings and activities with feeding opportunities. At 6:05 a.m., dispatch received an updated report about the prowler call, with additional witnesses reporting unusual sounds and movement in the commercial area near the airport. The enhanced information suggested that the situation might require more than a routine investigation, prompting Sergeant Torres to consider sending additional backup to support Paul and Lisa. However, the decision was delayed while dispatchers attempted to contact the original complainant for clarification of the reported activities. The delay in responding to the prowler call meant that Paul, Lisa, and Sean remained in the garage area for several additional minutes, continuing their preparations while unaware that they were being stalked by one of North America's most dangerous predators. Their casual conversation covered routine police matters, upcoming court dates, equipment needs, and personnel scheduling issues. The normalcy of their interaction stood in stark contrast to the life-threatening situation developing just outside the building's walls. Bear 247 began moving toward the station building at 6:07 a.m., abandoning his concealed position behind the maintenance shed for a direct approach to what he perceived as a potential food source. The bear's movement was deliberate, but not rushed, consistent with a predator that had assessed the situation and determined that the benefits outweighed the risks. His approach took him past several parked police vehicles, their metal surfaces reflecting the early morning sunlight and creating shadows that helped conceal his massive form from observers inside the building. The station's security camera system, installed 3 years earlier as part of a facility upgrade, should have detected the bear's approach and triggered alerts in the communication center. However, a software glitch in the motion detection algorithm had been causing false alarms triggered by wind-blown debris and small animals, leading technicians to adjust the sensitivity settings to reduce unnecessary alerts. The modified settings failed to register the bear's movement as a significant threat, allowing Bear 247 to approach the building without triggering any automated warning systems. Officer Jennifer Walsh was reviewing her presentation materials in the second-floor conference room when she noticed unusual movement in the parking lot below. From her vantage point, she could see most of the rear parking area and the tree line beyond the perimeter fence. Her initial observation was of something large moving between the parked vehicles, but the angle and distance made it difficult to determine exactly what she was seeing. Jennifer's training included wildlife awareness, and she immediately began moving to a better vantage point to confirm her suspicions. The bear's approach brought him to within 30 feet of the garage's rear entrance, a steel door that provided access to the workspace from the parking lot. This entrance was typically used by officers who needed to access vehicles or equipment without going through the main building, offering convenience and security for sensitive operations. The door was equipped with an electronic lock system that required either a key card or entry code, but these security measures were designed to deter human intruders rather than large wildlife. Inside the garage, Sean Briggs was loading his forensics equipment into the trunk of an unmarked police vehicle when he heard an unusual sound from outside the building. The noise was difficult to characterize, a combination of heavy footsteps, metallic scraping, and what might have been sniffing or breathing. His training had taught him to pay attention to subtle environmental cues that might indicate danger, and something about the sound pattern triggered his alertness despite its apparent inacuity. Paul Hernandez was checking the radio equipment in his patrol car when he noticed that Sean had stopped working and appeared to be listening intently to something outside the building. Paul's experience had taught him to trust his colleagues' instincts, particularly when they detected something unusual in their environment. He turned off the radio chatter to better hear whatever had caught Sean's attention, immediately noticing the same odd sounds that had alerted the detective. Lisa Monroe was reviewing case notes when both of her colleagues stopped their activities and began focusing on sounds from outside the garage. Her investigative training had developed her observational skills to a high degree, and she could detect the tension in the men's body language that suggested they were concerned about something potentially dangerous. She closed her notebook and moved closer to the others, instinctively reaching for the radio on her duty belt to prepare for possible communication with dispatch. The sounds from outside grew more pronounced at 6:09 a.m., including what was unmistakably the sound of heavy breathing and the scraping of claws against concrete. Sean whispered to his colleagues that they needed to identify what was causing the disturbance, but caution was necessary given the unusual nature of the sounds. Paul suggested looking through one of the garage's small windows to assess the situation before taking any action that might escalate a potentially dangerous encounter. Bear 247 had moved to the rear entrance of the garage and was investigating the steel door with his sensitive nose, detecting the complex mixture of human and mechanical scents that emanated from the interior space. The bear's behavior demonstrated the methodical approach typical of an experienced predator, gathering information about potential food sources while assessing possible threats or obstacles. His investigation included pawing at the doorframe and pushing against the door itself, testing its strength and looking for possible entry points. The garage door's electronic lock system was not designed to withstand the kind of physical force that a determined grizzly bear could exert. While the door itself was constructed of heavy steel and set within a reinforced frame, the locking mechanism represented a potential weak point that could fail under sufficient pressure. Bear 247's investigation of the door was teaching him about its construction and revealing the most vulnerable points for a forced entry attempt. Jennifer Walsh had moved to a window with a clear view of the rear parking area and confirmed her worst suspicions. A massive brown bear was investigating the garage entrance. Her training immediately kicked in, and she grabbed her radio to alert all personnel in the building about the wildlife emergency. Her broadcast, transmitted at 6:10 a.m., was the first official notification that a dangerous predator had breached the station's security perimeter and was actively threatening personnel inside the building. The radio alert reached Paul, Lisa, and Sean simultaneously, confirming their growing suspicions about the source of the unusual sounds outside the garage. Paul's immediate response was to draw his service weapon while moving away from the rear entrance, understanding that the steel door represented the most likely entry point for the bear. Lisa began calling for backup on her radio while positioning herself behind one of the parked vehicles for cover. Sean grabbed his laptop case and moved toward the interior door that connected the garage to the main building, recognizing that escape might be their best option. Sergeant Torres received Jennifer's radio alert while reviewing patrol assignments in his office and immediately began coordinating emergency response procedures. His experience with wildlife encounters had taught him that bears inside or near buildings represented extreme danger to personnel, requiring immediate evacuation of the area and specialized response from wildlife authorities. He began making phone calls to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game while simultaneously coordinating with dispatch to ensure that backup officers and emergency medical personnel were en route to the station. Bear 247's investigation of the garage door had revealed that the locking mechanism could be compromised through sufficient force applied to the door frame. The bear began pushing against the door with increasing intensity, using his massive weight and powerful shoulder muscles to stress the locking system beyond its design limits. The sounds of his efforts, metallic groaning, concrete cracking, and heavy breathing, were clearly audible to the three officers trapped inside the garage. The steel door began showing signs of failure at 6:12 a.m., with visible deformation around the lock housing and small cracks appearing in the concrete frame. Paul Hernandez realized that the door would not hold much longer and began coordinating with his colleagues for a defensive response that might give them time to reach the interior exit. His police training included scenarios involving armed intruders forcing entry into buildings, but none of his experience had prepared him for confronting a predator capable of breaking through structural barriers designed to stop human criminals. Lisa Monroe's radio communications with dispatch were providing real-time updates about the situation developing at the station, including the bear's progress toward forcing entry into the garage. Her reports were being recorded and would later provide crucial documentation of the timeline leading up to the attack. She maintained professional composure while describing increasingly desperate circumstances, focusing on providing actionable information that could assist responding emergency personnel. Sean Briggs had reached the interior door, connecting the garage to the main building, and was attempting to unlock it when he realized that the electronic access system was malfunctioning. Whether due to a technical failure or security protocols activated by the emergency alert, the door remained locked despite his valid access credentials. This malfunction would prove catastrophic, trapping all three officers in the garage with a determined predator who was seconds away from breaking through their only barrier. The failure of the interior door lock represented a perfect storm of circumstances that transformed a manageable wildlife encounter into a deadly trap. Had the officers been able to escape into the main building, they could have sealed themselves behind additional barriers while waiting for specialized wildlife response teams to arrive. Instead, they found themselves confined in a space with limited cover and no escape route, facing one of nature's most powerful predators. Bear 247 succeeded in breaking through the rear entrance at exactly 6:13 a.m., with the steel door's locking mechanism failing catastrophically under his sustained assault. The door swung inward with tremendous force, revealing the massive grizzly bear in the entranceway, his dark brown fur bristling with aggression and his small black eyes scanning the interior of the garage for threats and food sources. The bear's entry into the building marked the beginning of the most violent and terrifying minutes in the Fairbanks Police Department's history. Paul Hernandez was positioned approximately 20 feet from the entrance when the door failed, giving him the clearest view of the bear as it entered the garage. His first impression was of the animal's enormous size, far larger than any bear he had encountered during his years of police work in Alaska. The bear appeared to fill the entire doorway, its massive shoulders and head creating an imposing silhouette against the morning light outside. Paul's training took over immediately, and he raised his service weapon while shouting warnings to his colleagues about the immediate threat they were facing. The bear's initial response to finding humans in the enclosed space was a display behavior typical of grizzlies when confronted with perceived threats. Bear 247 reared up on his hind legs, reaching his full height of nearly 9 feet, while releasing a series of vocalizations that combined roars, huffs, and jaw-popping sounds designed to intimidate potential enemies. This display, terrifying as it was to the human observers, represented the bear's attempt to establish dominance and discourage aggressive responses from the officers. Lisa Monroe had taken cover behind a patrol vehicle when the bear entered, positioning herself to provide supporting fire if Paul decided to shoot. Her view of the bear was partially obscured by the vehicle, but she could clearly see the animal's massive size and aggressive posture. Lisa's experience with violent confrontations had taught her the importance of coordinated responses, and she was preparing to engage the threat while ensuring that her actions didn't endanger her colleagues in the confined space. Sean Briggs found himself in the most vulnerable position when the bear entered, standing near the malfunctioning interior door with limited cover between himself and the predator. His immediate instinct was to freeze, hoping to avoid triggering the bear's prey drive through sudden movement. Sean's tactical training had included scenarios involving dangerous wildlife, and he understood that predators often focused on moving targets while sometimes ignoring stationary ones. The bear's assessment of the situation was complicated by the presence of multiple humans, mechanical equipment, and artificial lighting that created confusion about potential threats and escape routes. Bear 247's natural instincts were conflicted between his hunger-driven search for food, his territorial response to perceived invaders, and his survival instinct that warned him about the dangers of being trapped in an enclosed space with unknown threats. This cognitive conflict would make his behavior unpredictable and extremely dangerous. Paul's decision to discharge his service weapon came after approximately 10 seconds of tense standoff as the bear began moving deeper into the garage while maintaining his aggressive posture. Paul fired 2 shots from his Glock 22 service pistol, aiming for the bear's center mass in accordance with his training for stopping dangerous threats. The .40 caliber rounds struck the bear in the chest and shoulder area, but failed to penetrate deeply enough to reach vital organs due to the animal's thick hide, dense muscle mass, and layer of fat that provided natural armor against such attacks. The gunshots had the opposite effect from what Paul had hoped, serving to enrage the bear rather than discourage his advance. Bear 247's response to being wounded was immediate and violent, dropping to all 4 legs and charging toward Paul with surprising speed for such a massive animal. The bear's charge covered the 20-foot distance in less than 3 seconds, demonstrating the incredible acceleration capability that made grizzly bears so dangerous in close-quarters encounters. Paul's attempt to fire additional shots was interrupted by the bear's charge, with Bear 247 colliding with the officer before he could discharge more rounds. The impact drove Paul backward against the side of a patrol vehicle, the crushing force of the collision immediately breaking several ribs and causing internal injuries that would prove fatal within minutes. The bear's initial attack focused on Paul's torso and arms, with massive claws raking across his uniform and body armor, while powerful jaws clamped down on his left shoulder. Lisa Monroe's response to Paul's attack was immediate, firing multiple rounds from her service weapon while moving to get a clear shot that wouldn't endanger her wounded colleague. Her shot struck the bear in the side and rear leg areas, causing additional wounds that further enraged the predator without immediately stopping his assault on Paul. Lisa's training had emphasized the difficulty of stopping large animals with handgun ammunition, but she continued firing while moving to find a position where she could deliver more effective shots. The bear's attack on Paul continued for approximately 30 seconds, with Bear 247 using his claws and teeth to inflict devastating injuries on the officer's upper body. Paul's attempts to fight back were hampered by his broken ribs and the overwhelming strength difference between himself and his attacker. His radio continued to transmit sounds of the attack to dispatch, providing real-time audio documentation of the violence unfolding in the garage. Sean Briggs had drawn his weapon during the initial standoff, but found himself unable to shoot effectively due to the close proximity between Paul and the bear. As soon as the bear's position shifted enough to provide a clear target, Sean began firing at the animal's head and neck area, hoping to deliver shots that might penetrate to the brain or spinal column. His rounds struck the bear multiple times, but the animal's thick skull and heavy musculature prevented immediate incapacitation. The combined gunfire from Lisa and Sean was having a cumulative effect on Bear 247, with multiple wounds beginning to weaken the animal and affect his coordination. However, the bear's adrenaline and natural resilience kept him fighting, despite injuries that would have quickly incapacitated a human. The predator's response to being shot was to expand his aggression to include all threats in the confined space, leading him to abandon his attack on Paul and focus on the officers who were actively shooting at him. Bear 247's transition from attacking Paul to targeting Lisa occurred at 6:14 a.m., with the wounded bear turning away from the critically injured officer and focusing on Detective Monroe, who had been delivering effective fire from her position behind a patrol vehicle. The bear's charge toward Lisa was slower than his initial attack on Paul, reflecting the cumulative effect of his gunshot wounds, but remained devastatingly powerful and determined. Lisa's attempt to evade the bear's charge was partially successful, with her tactical movement allowing her to avoid the full impact of the animal's initial rush. However, Bear 247's massive size and reach allowed him to strike Lisa with his right forepaw as she attempted to move around the rear of the patrol vehicle, sending her sprawling across the concrete floor with severe lacerations to her back and right arm. The force of the blow was sufficient to crack her body armor and cause internal injuries, though not immediately life-threatening. The bear's follow-up attack on Lisa was interrupted by continued gunfire from Sean Briggs, who had moved to a position where he could deliver flanking shots at the animal's head and neck. Sean's marksmanship training was evident in his shot placement, with several rounds striking the bear in areas that began to affect his motor functions and coordination. However, the bear's determination to eliminate threats remained undiminished, and he began moving toward Sean while Lisa attempted to crawl to safety behind another vehicle. Sean's tactical position near the malfunctioning interior door had initially seemed disadvantageous, but it now provided him with distance and cover as the wounded bear attempted to reach him. Sean continued firing methodically, aiming for the most vulnerable areas he could identify, while conserving ammunition for what might be a prolonged engagement. His training had emphasized the importance of remaining calm under extreme stress, and he maintained disciplined fire control despite the horrific scene unfolding around him. Bear 247's approach to Sean was visibly affected by his accumulating injuries, with the animal showing signs of weakness and disorientation that hadn't been present during his earlier attacks. Blood loss, shock, and potential neurological damage from headshots were beginning to compromise the bear's coordination and strength. However, the predator's survival instincts kept him fighting, recognizing that he needed to eliminate the remaining threats before his condition deteriorated further. The bear's final attack began at 6:15 a.m., with Bear 247 making a determined effort to reach Sean, despite his weakening condition. The animal's charge was noticeably slower than his previous attacks, but his massive size and remaining strength still represented a deadly threat to the detective. Sean's position near the door limited his ability to maneuver, forcing him to stand his ground and continue firing until either the bear was stopped or his ammunition was exhausted. Sean's final shots were delivered at point-blank range as Bear 247 reached his position, with the detective firing directly into the animal's face and head from a distance of less than 6 feet. These shots proved decisive, with at least one round penetrating the bear's skull and causing immediate neurological damage that ended his ability to continue the attack. Bear 247 collapsed at Sean's feet, his massive body convulsing briefly before becoming still. The sudden silence that followed the bear's collapse was broken only by the sound of Paul's labored breathing and Lisa's attempts to radio for emergency medical assistance. Sean remained in position with his weapon trained on the motionless bear, following protocols that required confirmation of an animal's death before approaching or lowering guard. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with blood and the bear's natural musk created an atmosphere that would haunt the survivors for years to come. Emergency medical personnel had been en route to the police station since Jennifer Walsh's initial radio alert, but the confined nature of the garage and the ongoing gunfight had prevented them from approaching the building until the threat was neutralized. Sean's radio confirmation that the bear was down came at 6:16 a.m., triggering an immediate response from paramedics, firefighters, and additional police officers who had been staging at a safe distance from the station. The first paramedics to enter the garage found a scene of devastating carnage that challenged their experience treating trauma in Alaska's dangerous environment. Paul Hernandez was unconscious and suffering from massive blood loss due to deep lacerations on his torso, arms, and neck, with obvious signs of internal injuries from the bear's crushing attack. His vital signs were weak and deteriorating rapidly, indicating that he had suffered injuries that were likely beyond the scope of field treatment. Lisa Monroe was conscious but in severe pain from her injuries, which included deep claw marks across her back and right arm, possible internal bleeding from the bear's powerful blow, and a suspected concussion from striking the concrete floor. Her training as a police officer helped her remain coherent enough to provide information about her injuries and medical history, though she was clearly in shock from the traumatic experience and significant blood loss. Sean Briggs appeared to be physically uninjured, despite his close encounter with the bear during the final moments of the attack, though he was exhibiting clear signs of psychological shock and post-traumatic stress from the horrific experience. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, and he was having difficulty responding to questions from the paramedics, though he continued to maintain his weapon at ready position until supervisors arrived to secure the scene. The logistical challenge of treating multiple trauma victims in the confined garage space required careful coordination between emergency medical personnel, police supervisors who needed to secure the scene, and wildlife officials who needed to confirm that the bear posed no further threat. The narrow doorways and presence of vehicles limited the paramedics' ability to maneuver equipment and gurneys, forcing them to adapt their standard procedures for such situations. Paul Hernandez was triaged as the most critical patient and received immediate advanced life support measures, including intravenous fluids, pain medication, and pressure dressings for his most severe lacerations. However, his injuries were so extensive that the paramedics recognized the need for immediate transport to the trauma center at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, where surgical intervention might be able to save his life. The decision to transport Paul first was made within minutes of the paramedics' arrival, with a helicopter emergency medical service being called to reduce transport time. Lisa Monroe's injuries were serious but not immediately life-threatening, allowing paramedics to provide more comprehensive treatment at the scene before transport. Her wounds were cleaned and bandaged, IV access was established for pain medication and fluid replacement, and she was immobilized on a backboard due to concerns about potential spinal injuries from her fall. Lisa remained conscious throughout her treatment, asking repeatedly about Paul's condition and expressing concern for her colleagues' welfare despite her own significant injuries. The helicopter arrival at 6:31 a.m. created additional chaos at the police station, with the aircraft's rotor wash disturbing evidence at the scene and requiring coordination with fixed-wing aircraft operating out of nearby Fairbanks International Airport. The paramedic crew aboard the helicopter was specially trained in trauma management, and their assessment of Paul's condition confirmed the ground paramedics' concerns about his survivability, given the extent of his injuries. Paul Hernandez was loaded into the helicopter at 6:35 a.m. and transported immediately to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, where a trauma team had been assembled and was waiting in the emergency department. The flight took 8 minutes, during which the flight paramedic worked to stabilize Paul's vital signs and maintain his airway, which was compromised by facial swelling and blood accumulation from his injuries. Radio communications between the helicopter and hospital provided advance notice of Paul's critical condition and specific injury patterns. Lisa Monroe was transported by ground ambulance at 6:42 a.m., with 2 paramedics continuing to monitor her condition during the 12-minute drive to the hospital. Her vital signs remained stable during transport, but she was experiencing increasing pain as the shock began to wear off and her body began to process the full extent of her injuries. Lisa's radio communications during the incident had been recorded, and she was able to provide additional details about the attack sequence during her transport to the hospital. Sean Briggs declined medical transport initially, insisting that he was uninjured and needed to remain at the scene to provide information about the incident. However, police supervisors and paramedics recognized signs of psychological trauma that required professional evaluation, and Sean was eventually convinced to accept transport to the hospital for observation and psychological support services. His detailed account of the attack would prove crucial for investigators trying to understand how the incident had unfolded. The scene at the police station was secured by Sergeant Torres and additional officers who had responded to the emergency, with the garage area being treated as both a crime scene and a wildlife incident requiring specialized investigation. The bear's carcass was photographed and documented before being removed by Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel, who would conduct a necropsy to determine the animal's health status and confirm the circumstances of its death. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at the police station at 7:15 a.m. after being notified about the incident involving Bear 247, whose radio collar had been recovered from the animal's carcass. Her preliminary examination of the scene and the bear's body provided important information about the animal's behavior and condition, which would be crucial for understanding how such an unprecedented attack had occurred. Dr. Chen's documentation would become part of the official investigation and would influence future wildlife management policies. The media response to the incident began within hours of the attack, with local television stations and newspapers reporting on what was being called the most serious wildlife attack on law enforcement personnel in Alaska's history. The dramatic nature of the incident, combined with the recording of radio traffic during the attack, created intense public interest and concern about human-wildlife conflicts in the Fairbanks area. At Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, Paul Hernandez was rushed into emergency surgery at 6:48 a.m., where a team led by Dr. Michael Zhang began attempting to repair the devastating injuries inflicted by the bear's claws and teeth. Paul's injuries included deep lacerations to his chest and arms that had severed major blood vessels, crushed ribs that had punctured his lungs, and severe trauma to his left shoulder where the bear's jaws had clamped down with crushing force. The surgical team worked for over 4 hours to repair Paul's injuries, but the extent of the trauma proved too severe for medical intervention to overcome. Internal bleeding from multiple organ damage, combined with the shock of massive blood loss, led to cardiac arrest at 11:23 a.m. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, Paul Hernandez was pronounced dead at 11:47 a.m., becoming Alaska's first law enforcement officer killed in the line of duty by a wildlife attack. Lisa Monroe underwent surgery to repair the deep lacerations on her back and arm, with plastic surgeons working to minimize scarring and preserve function in her injured limbs. Her internal injuries proved less severe than initially feared, though she had suffered a mild concussion and would require extensive physical therapy to regain full use of her right arm. Lisa's surgery was successful, and she was transferred to the intensive care unit in stable condition. Sean Briggs remained under observation in the hospital's psychiatric unit, where mental health professionals provided crisis counseling and began developing a treatment plan for post-traumatic stress disorder. Sean's psychological symptoms included flashbacks, severe anxiety, and survivor's guilt related to Paul's death, requiring immediate intervention to prevent long-term mental health complications. His treatment would become a model for addressing psychological trauma in law enforcement officers who survive violent encounters. The investigation into the bear attack began immediately, with multiple agencies contributing expertise and resources to understand how such an incident had occurred and what measures might prevent similar attacks in the future. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game led the wildlife investigation, while the Fairbanks Police Department and Alaska State Troopers handled the law enforcement aspects of the incident. Dr. Chen's necropsy of Bear 247 revealed important information about the animal's condition and behavior leading up to the attack. The bear was found to be suffering from severe malnutrition and had parasites that may have affected his judgment and behavior. Additionally, the bear's teeth showed signs of damage that would have made normal foraging difficult, possibly explaining his desperate search for easily accessible food sources in human settlements. The investigation also revealed several systemic failures that had contributed to the severity of the incident. The security camera malfunction had prevented early detection of the bear's approach, while the interior door lock failure had trapped the officers in the garage with the attacking animal. Additionally, the garbage storage protocols had not been followed properly, creating the scent trail that initially attracted the bear to the building. Public reaction to the incident was intense and emotional, with community members expressing shock that such an attack could occur inside a police station. The incident sparked debates about wildlife management policies, building security measures, and the risks faced by law enforcement officers in Alaska's unique environment. Memorial services for Paul Hernandez drew hundreds of community members and law enforcement officers from across the state. The legal implications of the incident were complex, involving questions about worker compensation, building liability, and wildlife management responsibilities. Paul's widow, Maria, filed wrongful death claims against multiple entities, arguing that preventable security failures had contributed to her husband's death. These legal proceedings would continue for several years and result in significant changes to wildlife protocols at public buildings throughout Alaska. Officer Jennifer Walsh, who had first spotted the bear and alerted her colleagues, struggled with guilt about whether she could have done more to prevent the attack. Her testimony during the investigation revealed that she had noticed unusual wildlife activity in the area for several days prior to the incident, but had not reported it through proper channels due to the routine nature of such sightings in Alaska. The psychological impact of the incident extended throughout the Fairbanks Police Department, with many officers requesting transfers or early retirement after experiencing secondary trauma from learning about their colleagues' attack. The department implemented comprehensive counseling programs and revised its policies for handling wildlife encounters, recognizing that traditional law enforcement training was inadequate for dealing with large predator attacks. Lisa Monroe's recovery was slow and complicated by infection in her wounds and ongoing psychological trauma from the attack. She required multiple surgeries to repair nerve damage in her right arm and underwent extensive physical therapy to regain strength and mobility. Lisa's return to active duty was delayed by over a year, and she ultimately requested assignment to administrative duties rather than field work. Sean Briggs's psychological recovery proved even more challenging than Lisa's physical healing. Despite intensive therapy and medication, he continued to experience severe post-traumatic stress symptoms that prevented him from returning to police work. Sean eventually accepted medical retirement from the department and relocated to a different state, hoping that distance from the scene of the trauma would aid his recovery. The bear attack at the Fairbanks Police Department resulted in comprehensive changes to wildlife management protocols throughout Alaska, with new requirements for building security, employee training, and emergency response procedures. The incident became a case study for law enforcement agencies in other states with large predator populations, influencing policy development across North America. Dr. Chen's research into bear behavior was redirected to focus on human-wildlife conflicts in urban areas, with particular attention to the factors that cause normally reclusive animals to become aggressive toward humans. Her work following the police station incident contributed to improved understanding of how climate change and habitat disruption were increasing the frequency and severity of wildlife encounters in Alaska. The Fairbanks community established a memorial fund for Paul Hernandez's family and created annual awards recognizing law enforcement officers who demonstrated exceptional courage in dangerous situations. Paul's daughters, Elena and Sophia, used their father's death as motivation to pursue careers in wildlife biology and law enforcement, respectively, hoping to prevent similar tragedies through their professional work. The garage where the attack occurred was renovated extensively, with new security systems, reinforced doors, and emergency communication equipment designed to prevent similar incidents. However, many officers reported feeling uncomfortable working in the space, and the department ultimately relocated some operations to other buildings to address personnel concerns about the location. The incident's impact on Alaska's wildlife management policies was substantial, with new regulations requiring enhanced monitoring of radio-collared bears and improved communication between research scientists and law enforcement agencies. The protocols developed following the attack became models for other states dealing with large predator management issues. Media coverage of the incident continued for months after the attack, with national news outlets reporting on the unique nature of the incident and its implications for human-wildlife coexistence in Alaska. The recorded radio traffic from the incident became part of law enforcement training programs, though its use was controversial due to the traumatic nature of the content. The final investigative report, released 8 months after the incident, identified multiple contributing factors and made dozens of recommendations for preventing similar attacks. The report's findings influenced building codes, wildlife management practices, and law enforcement training programs throughout Alaska and other states with significant wildlife populations. Paul Hernandez's funeral service was attended by over 2,000 people, including law enforcement officers from throughout North America, who came to honor Alaska's first officer killed by a wildlife attack. The service highlighted Paul's dedication to public service and his role as a father and husband, while acknowledging the unique risks faced by Alaska's law enforcement community. The psychological research conducted following the incident contributed to improved understanding of how first responders cope with extreme traumatic events, particularly those involving animal attacks. The treatment protocols developed for Sean Briggs and other affected personnel became models for addressing similar trauma in other emergency service workers. 5 years after the attack, Lisa Monroe published a book about her experience and recovery, hoping to help other trauma survivors understand that healing was possible despite severe physical and psychological injuries. Her account provided detailed insights into the attack and its aftermath, becoming an important resource for researchers studying human responses to predator encounters. The incident's legacy continues to influence Alaska's approach to wildlife management and public safety, with annual training programs that use the police station attack as a case study for understanding how routine situations can escalate into life-threatening emergencies. The lessons learned from April 16, 2025, have undoubtedly prevented similar tragedies and saved lives throughout Alaska and other regions where humans and large predators share the landscape. Bear 247's radio collar data, analyzed extensively after the attack, revealed movement patterns that suggested the animal had been investigating human settlements for weeks prior to the incident, gradually losing his natural fear of people as hunger overcame his survival instincts. This behavioral information contributed to improved protocols for managing radio-collared animals that show signs of habituation to human presence. The 3 minutes and 17 seconds from Bear 247's entry into the garage until his death became one of the most intensively studied wildlife attacks in North American history, with frame-by-frame analysis of security footage and detailed reconstruction of the officer's actions, providing insights into how humans and predators interact during life-threatening encounters. This research has informed training programs for park rangers, wildlife biologists, and law enforcement officers throughout regions where large predators pose potential threats to human safety. The economic impact of the incident extended far beyond the immediate costs of medical treatment and property damage, with the Fairbanks Police Department spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on facility modifications, equipment upgrades, and personnel counseling services. The broader community also invested heavily in wildlife education programs and bear-proofing measures designed to reduce the likelihood of future human-wildlife conflicts. The scientific community's response to the incident included comprehensive studies of urban bear behavior, stress responses in both humans and animals during violent encounters, and the effectiveness of various weapons and tactics against large predators. These research efforts contributed to improved understanding of predator psychology and better preparation for emergency responders who might face similar situations. 10 years after the attack, the Fairbanks Police Department continues to conduct annual memorial services honoring Paul Hernandez's sacrifice while maintaining rigorous training programs that prepare officers for the unique challenges of law enforcement in Alaska's wilderness environment. The incident remains a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers faced by those who serve and protect in one of North America's most challenging and unforgiving landscapes. The legacy of Bear 247 extends beyond the tragedy he caused, serving as a catalyst for improved wildlife management practices, enhanced emergency response protocols, and better understanding of the complex relationships between humans and large predators in Alaska's rapidly changing environment. The lessons learned from his final, violent encounter with 3 police officers continue to save lives and prevent similar tragedies throughout the state and beyond.